The Montana wilderness woke at 0500, same as it did every morning, indifferent to the man who lived within its shadows. Thomas Brennan opened his eyes in the darkness of his cabin, his body already registering the familiar enemy that came with age. Pain. Not the clean pain of a bullet wound or the sharp clarity of a broken bone. This was the grinding, relentless ache of arthritis that had settled into his hands like an occupying force he could never fully defeat. He was 62 years old. Once upon a time, those hands had been the most dangerous weapons in the United States Marine Corps. Now they trembled as he reached for the lamp beside his bed. The light revealed what 14 years of solitude had created: a room stripped to essentials, a single bed with military corners so tight a quarter would bounce, a footlocker containing everything he owned, no photographs on the walls, no mementos, nothing that connected Thomas Brennan to the man he used to be, the ghost he'd buried in the mountains of Afghanistan, the legend called Ghost, who had simply vanished after the Helmand massacre of 2011. Thomas swung his legs out of bed, and his knees protested immediately. The cold November air bit through the thin fabric of his thermal underwear. He stood slowly, methodically, the way a man learns to move when sudden movements bring consequences. His reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin showed the truth that no amount of discipline could hide. Gray hair cropped military short, a face carved by weather and time into something harder than the man who'd enlisted at 18. Eyes that had seen the things no training manual could prepare you for. But it was the hands that told the real story. Thomas held them up in the lamplight, studying the slight tremor that never fully stopped. The knuckles were swollen, the fingers stiff. These hands had once held a rifle scope steady for 6 hours in 100-degree heat, waiting for a single shot that would save an entire platoon. These hands had threaded a needle through a sandstorm, had assembled a rifle blindfolded in 43 seconds, had never missed when lives depended on perfect precision. Now they shook when he tried to button his shirt. The morning ritual began the same way it had for 5,000 mornings. Physical therapy disguised as routine. Thomas filled a basin with water as hot as he could stand, submerged his hands, and began the exercises. Flex, extend, rotate, each movement accompanied by pain that radiated up his forearms. 30 minutes of this every single day, just to achieve enough flexibility to grip a coffee mug without dropping it. While his hands soaked, his mind went where it always went in these quiet hours. Back to Helmand Province, 2011. Back to the day that divided his life into before and after. The mission brief had been straightforward. Intelligence indicated a high-value target, a Taliban commander responsible for 3 IED attacks that had killed 17 Marines. Ghost and his team of 12 were inserted under cover of darkness, tasked with observation and elimination if the opportunity presented itself. They'd set up in a compound overlooking a valley, established firing positions, and waited. But the intelligence had been wrong, not incompetent, not mistaken, deliberately falsified. The compound they were observing wasn't a Taliban stronghold. It was a weapons cache, but not the enemy's weapons. These were American rifles, American ammunition, American equipment being moved through a pipeline that ended in Taliban hands. And the man orchestrating the operation wasn't some distant arms dealer. It was General Clayton Wade, Thomas's own chain of command, running an illegal trafficking ring that was arming the very enemy, killing American Marines. Thomas had documented everything: photographs, video, coordinates. He'd called it in to Colonel Frank Sullivan, the only officer he trusted completely. Sullivan had confirmed the worst. Wade had been under investigation for months, but he was well-connected, politically protected, seemingly untouchable. Until Ghost's team witnessed the operation firsthand. Wade's response had been swift and absolute. The compound where Ghost's team was positioned was hit by an airstrike. Not Taliban mortars, not enemy fire. American jets dropping American bombs on American Marines. 12 men under Thomas's command. 12 brothers. 12 warriors who'd survived Fallujah and Ramadi and Sangin. Dead in an instant, burned to ash and rubble by their own military, sacrificed to protect a general's criminal enterprise and political career. Thomas had survived only because he'd been on the roof, 40 feet from the main building when the first bomb hit. The blast had thrown him clear, broken 3 ribs, shattered his left shoulder. He'd crawled through fire and debris, found pieces of his team scattered across the compound, and made a decision that would define the rest of his life. If he reported what happened, Wade would kill him. If he testified, Wade would kill everyone Thomas loved. His wife Mary, his son Marcus, Sullivan. Every connection that could be used as leverage. So Thomas Brennan died that day in Helmand, officially listed as killed in action, body unrecoverable due to the intensity of the blast. The Marine Corps held a memorial service. His name was added to the wall. His family received a folded flag and the thanks of a grateful nation. And the real Thomas Brennan had walked into the Montana wilderness to become a ghost in truth. 14 years, 5,000 mornings of hand exercises and isolation, 14 years of watching from a distance as his wife aged without him, as his son grew into a man who believed his father had died a hero, as Mary Brennan's health declined from cancer that Thomas only learned about through obituaries he read in town 6 months after her funeral. The guilt was a weight that arthritis could never match. Thomas dried his hands and began the next phase of the morning routine. Breakfast was oatmeal and black coffee, consumed while reading a 3-day-old newspaper from the town of Whitefish, 30 miles down the mountain. He rarely went to town himself. A local kid named Danny brought supplies twice a month in exchange for cash and venison from Thomas's hunting. Danny thought Thomas was just another hermit veteran, which was true enough not to require explanation. After breakfast came the physical maintenance, push-ups, though his wrist could only handle 20 now instead of the 200 from his prime. Pull-ups on the bar he'd installed in the doorframe, 6 painful repetitions that left his shoulders burning, a 3-mile run that had become a 3-mile walk, his knees no longer capable of absorbing the impact. By 800, Thomas was in his workshop, a shed attached to the main cabin where he did the work that kept him alive. Leather crafting mostly, belts and holsters and knife sheaths that he sold through a contact and Kalispell. The repetitive work was good therapy for his hands, and the income covered the basics. He lived on almost nothing, needed almost nothing, wanted nothing except the one thing he could never have: forgiveness from a son who didn't know he was alive. The morning passed in familiar silence. Thomas worked leather until his hands cramped too badly to continue. He cleaned his cabin, swept the porch, split wood for the stove. The routines of survival, the rituals that marked time for a man who had stopped living and started merely existing. At 14:30, Danny's truck appeared on the long dirt road earlier than expected. Danny was 17, lanky and earnest, the kind of kid who'd probably end up enlisting despite Thomas's subtle discouragement. The truck pulled up to the cabin and Danny hopped out carrying a package along with the usual supplies. "Got something for you, Mr. Brennan," Danny said, his Montana drawl stretching the words. "Came certified mail, had to sign for it at the post office." Thomas felt something cold settle in his chest. In 14 years, he'd received exactly 0 pieces of certified mail. No one knew he was here. No one except one person. He took the package with hands that trembled for reasons beyond arthritis. Plain brown paper, no return address, but Thomas recognized the handwriting immediately. Sullivan's precise military print, unchanged in 3 decades. "Thanks, Danny. The usual payment is in the kitchen." Danny collected his cash, loaded the venison Thomas had prepared, and drove off with a wave. Thomas stood on his porch holding the package, knowing that opening it would end something. 14 years of peace, perhaps, or 14 years of running. Hard to say which. Inside the cabin, Thomas sat at his kitchen table and carefully opened the package. Inside was a folder, a burner phone, and a handwritten letter. He read the letter first. "Ghost, I'm sorry to do this. I swore I'd let you stay dead. But your son's life is on the line. Wade knows you're alive. He's known for 3 years. He's been waiting for the right opportunity to draw you out. That opportunity is now. Marcus is commanding a Ranger protection detail at the Seattle Refugee Center. 4,000 Afghan and Syrian refugees, mostly families, mostly children. Wade has orchestrated a false flag attack. Cascade Legion, a domestic terror cell, 50 armed men. They're going to massacre everyone on Thanksgiving Day. Wade will blame Islamic extremism, justify a new military intervention, and profit from the chaos. But the real target is Marcus. Wade knows if he threatens your son, you'll come out of hiding. And when you do, he'll kill you both. I have a team ready, old brothers who never believed you died. We can stop this, but we need you. Not because you're Ghost, because you're Marcus's father, and he needs his father even if he doesn't know it. The phone has one number programmed. Call when you're ready, Or don't call and let me try to save your son alone. Either way, I understand. You've already sacrificed everything. Frank Sullivan. Thomas set the letter down with hands that shook so badly he had to clench them into fists. He opened the folder with his eyes already burning. The first photograph showed Marcus in army dress uniform, captain's bars bright on his shoulders. 32 years old, strong jaw, serious eyes, the Brennan family resemblance unmistakable. Thomas hadn't seen his son's face in 14 years, except in dreams that always ended the same way, with Marcus asking why his father had abandoned him. The second photograph was from Marcus's wedding. A beautiful young woman in white, Marcus in his dress blues, both of them smiling with the kind of joy that comes from believing the future holds only good things. Thomas had missed his own son's wedding, hadn't even known Marcus was engaged. The third photograph made Thomas's heart stop. Mary's funeral. Marcus standing alone beside a casket, head bowed, shoulders carrying the weight of grief that should have been shared with a father who was supposed to be there. The date on the funeral program was April 2020, 5 years ago. His wife had died 5 years ago, and Thomas had been living in a cabin 3 states away, reading about it in an obituary like she'd been a stranger. The fourth photograph was recent. Marcus in tactical gear, standing with a group of Rangers outside a large building with a sign that read Saddle Refugee Center. The intel report attached indicated Marcus had been assigned to head security for the center 3 months ago. A routine posting, except nothing involving Wade was ever routine. The final document was the classified assessment of the Cascade Legion threat. 50 operators, former military, heavily armed, planning to hit the center on Thanksgiving when maximum civilians would be present for a community meal. The attack would be coordinated, professional, designed to maximize casualties and create national outrage. Wade's fingerprints were nowhere on the official documents, but Sullivan had noted in the margins where the money trail led, how the weapons had been sourced, which political figures stood to benefit from renewed military engagement in the Middle East. It was Helmand all over again, except this time Wade wasn't just willing to sacrifice Marines. He was willing to murder 4,000 innocent people, including Thomas's own son, to tie up loose ends and advance his agenda. Thomas sat at the table as afternoon light faded into evening. The photographs spread before him like evidence at a crime scene. His crime, the crime of choosing survival over family, of letting his wife believe he'd died, of letting his son grow up without a father because Thomas had been too afraid that staying would get them killed. And maybe he'd been right. Maybe Wade would have come for them. Or maybe Thomas had just been a coward who'd convinced himself that running was noble. The burner phone sat on the table, silent and accusatory. One call. That's all it would take. One call to Frank Sullivan, and Thomas would be acknowledging what he'd tried to deny for 14 years. That ghost hadn't died in Helmand. That the debt owed to 12 dead Marines wasn't paid by hiding in Montana. That being a father meant more than biological connection. It meant showing up, even when showing up might cost everything. Thomas picked up the phone, put it down, picked it up again. His hands were shaking worse than ever. But for once, it wasn't the arthritis. What would he even say to Marcus? How do you explain to a son that you've been alive for 14 years while he mourned you? How do you ask forgiveness for missing a wedding, a funeral, every birthday and Christmas, an ordinary day that fathers and sons are supposed to share? You don't, Thomas realized. You don't explain. You don't ask forgiveness. You just act. You show up. You do what fathers do. You protect your son and you let the consequences fall where they may. Thomas picked up the phone and dialed the only number programmed into it. It rang twice before Sullivan answered. Ghost. Sullivan's voice was thick with emotion. I wasn't sure you'd call. Is the intel solid? Is Marcus really in danger? Yes, Wade has been planning this for 2 years. The moment Marcus was assigned to Seattle, Wade activated the Cascade Legion. This is the trap, Thomas. This is how he draws you out and kills you both. Then I'm coming out. When's the attack? 3 days. Thanksgiving morning. But Thomas, there's something else you need to know. The pause on the line stretched too long. Thomas's combat instincts flared. What? Marcus doesn't know I'm calling you. As far as he's concerned, his father died in Helmand. And Thomas, he's angry about it. Your name comes up, he shuts down. I tried to tell him once, a few years back, suggested maybe the official story wasn't complete. He almost took my head off. Said his father was a hero who died serving his country, and anyone who suggested otherwise was disrespecting his memory. Thomas closed his eyes. He hates me. He hates what he thinks happened. He doesn't know the truth. And telling him the truth now when he's focused on protecting 4,000 people, that could compromise the mission. So what do you suggest? Come to Seattle. Let me brief you on the tactical situation. We'll figure out how to approach Marcus together. But Thomas, you need to prepare yourself. Your son is not going to welcome you with open arms. He's going to be angry, confused, possibly hostile. You're going to have to earn his trust, and we might not have time for that. I don't care if he trusts me. I care if he lives. Then get on a plane. I'll text you the details. And Thomas, it's good to hear your voice, brother. I've missed you. I've missed you too, Frank. Thomas ended the call and sat in the gathering darkness of his cabin. 14 years of isolation ending with a single phone call. Part of him wanted to back out, to convince himself that Sullivan and the old team could handle this without Ghost's help. Let the legend stay dead. Let Marcus keep his hero father frozen in time, forever 37, forever brave, forever untarnished by the complicated truth. But that was cowardice talking, and Thomas Brennan had been a coward long enough. He stood and walked to the footlocker at the foot of his bed. He hadn't opened it in 5 years. Inside, carefully wrapped in oilcloth, was the rifle that had made him a legend. The M40A5, custom built to his specifications. The weapon that had taken 89 lives and saved countless others. Ghost's rifle. The tool that had defined him, destroyed him, and might now be the only thing that could save his son. Thomas lifted the rifle from its wrapping, and despite the arthritis, despite the years, his hands remembered. They settled into the familiar grip like coming home. The weight was perfect, the balance exact. And when he brought the scope to his eye and looked through it at the Montana wilderness, the world narrowed to that circle of perfect clarity that had always been his truth. He might be 62, his hands might shake, his knees might protest, his eyes might need reading glasses. But through a scope, looking at a target, Ghost was still Ghost. Thomas carefully repacked the rifle and began to gather the few possessions that mattered. His discharge papers, in case he needed to prove his identity. Photographs of Mary and Marcus, because he wanted his son's face close. The dog tags he'd kept despite faking his death. The metal worn smooth by 14 years of nervous handling. By midnight, he was ready. A small duffel bag containing everything Ghost needed. He left the cabin as he'd found it 14 years ago, empty except for the furniture that had been there when he arrived. Danny would come looking eventually, find the place abandoned, probably assume the old hermit had finally died. That was fine. Thomas Brennan the hermit was dying tonight anyway. Only Ghost would walk onto that plane to Seattle. The nearest airport was in Kalispell, a 2-hour drive through mountain roads. Thomas had a truck, ancient and reliable, that he'd use maybe twice a year for supply runs. It started on the third try, engine coughing in the cold November night. As he drove down the mountain, Thomas tried to plan what he'd say to Marcus. Nothing sounded right. Everything sounded like excuses. By the time he reached Kalispell, dawn was breaking over the mountains. The airport was small, regional, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Thomas bought a ticket to Seattle using cash and a driver's license that identified him as Thomas Brennan, which was true enough. No one looked twice at the old man with the duffel bag. Airports were full of old men with duffel bags, most of them veterans, most of them carrying the weight of wars that never really ended. The flight left at 900. Thomas sat in the back row, his duffel secured under the seat in front of him, and watched Montana disappear beneath clouds. 14 years in those mountains. 14 years of pretending he was dead. And now he was flying toward the one person who had every right to wish he actually was. Seattle appeared through the cloud cover 2 hours later. The city sprawled beneath him, urban and alive, so different from the wilderness silence he'd known for so long. The plane landed, taxied to the gate, and Thomas waited until everyone else had deplaned before standing. His knees protested, his back was stiff from the cramped seat. He was 62 years old, and he felt every single year. But his hands were steady when he gripped the duffel bag. The rifle inside was a familiar weight, a reminder of who he used to be and who he might need to become again. Sullivan was waiting at baggage claim, and Thomas recognized him instantly despite 14 years of aging. Frank Sullivan was 58 now, hair completely gray, face lined by stress and time. But the eyes were the same, sharp, alert, the eyes of a warrior who'd never really left the battlefield. They embraced without words, two old Marines who'd seen too much and lost too much, and somehow survived anyway. Sullivan held on longer than necessary, and when they finally separated, his eyes were wet. "Let me look at you," Sullivan said, stepping back. "Jesus, Thomas, you look old." "I'm old, we both are." "Yeah, but I aged gracefully. You look like you've been living in a cave." "Close enough. How's Marcus?" Sullivan's expression shifted, became professional. Focused on the mission. "He's good, Thomas. Really good. Natural leader. His Rangers would follow him into hell. But he's carrying weight. Your death, his mother's death. He throws himself into the work because it's easier than dealing with the grief." "Sounds familiar?" "Yeah, you Brennans have a type." Sullivan guided Thomas toward the parking garage. "I've got a safe house set up. Old team is gathering there. We need to brief you on the full tactical situation before you approach Marcus." "How many of the old team?" "Everyone who's still alive and mobile. Doc Martinez, Hawk Patterson, Rico Alvarez, Bull O'Brien, the Montana crew. They all volunteered the second I told them Ghost might be coming back." Thomas stopped walking. "Frank, they think I'm dead. They mourned me. What am I supposed to say to them? The truth, that you had to die to keep them alive. They'll understand. We're Marines, Thomas. We understand sacrifice." They drove through Seattle in Sullivan's truck, a beat-up Ford that had seen better days. The city was decorated for Thanksgiving, storefronts advertising holiday sales, families visible through restaurant windows enjoying early dinners. Normal life. The life Thomas had given up to protect people who didn't even know they needed protecting. The safe house was in a quiet neighborhood south of the city, a rental property Sullivan had secured through his veteran support network. When they pulled up, Thomas saw other vehicles already parked outside. His heart hammered against his ribs. Facing Marcus was one thing. Facing the brothers he'd let believe he was dead, that was something else entirely. Sullivan seemed to read his mind. "They're going to be happy to see you, Thomas. Angry maybe, but happy. You didn't abandon us. You protected us. There's a difference." Thomas followed Sullivan into the house, and the moment he stepped through the door, everything stopped. Four men stood in the living room, frozen in mid-conversation, staring at Thomas like he was actually a ghost. Doc Martinez, the medic who'd saved Thomas's life twice in Fallujah. Hawk Patterson, the reconnaissance specialist who could read terrain better than any satellite. Rico Alvarez, the demolitions expert who could build a bomb from hardware store supplies. Bull O'Brien, the heavy weapons man who'd carried a M240 machine gun like it was a toy. All of them older now, all of them showing the wear of years and wars, but all of them still standing, still breathing, still the brothers Thomas had fought beside and then abandoned to protect. Doc spoke first, his voice breaking. "Ghost, is that really you?" "It's me, Doc." And then they were moving, all of them at once, surrounding Thomas in an embrace that felt like absolution, hands gripping his shoulders, voices overlapping with questions and curses and laughter. Bull was crying openly, the big man's shoulders shaking. Hawk kept touching Thomas's face like he needed physical confirmation. Rico was talking rapid fire in Spanish. The words too fast to follow, but the emotion unmistakable. They eventually separated and everyone was wiping eyes, clearing throats, trying to regain some semblance of military bearing. Doc punched Thomas in the shoulder, hard enough to actually hurt. 14 years, you bastard. We had a funeral. I gave a eulogy. I cried over your empty casket. I'm sorry, I had to disappear. Wade would have killed all of you if he knew I survived. We know, Hawk said. Sullivan filled us in. Doesn't mean we're not pissed, but we get it. We'd have done the same. Bull crossed his arms, his expression serious despite the tears still wet on his face. So now what? Wade's threatening your kid and you're back from the dead to settle accounts? Something like that. Good. We're in. Whatever you need. Old team rides together, even if the team's a bunch of broken down old men. Sullivan moved to the center of the room, shifting everyone into mission mode. All right, listen up. We've got 3 days before the Cascade Legion hits the refugee center. Intel says 50 operators, all former military, heavily armed. They're planning a coordinated assault during the Thanksgiving community meal when the center will have maximum civilians. 4,000 people, mostly families, mostly children. He pulled up a laptop and projected images onto the wall. Satellite photos of the Seattle Refugee Center, a sprawling complex of buildings that had once been a community college. Floor plans showing multiple entry points, wide open spaces that would become kill zones, limited cover for defenders. Marcus is commanding 30 Rangers, Sullivan continued. Good men, well-trained, but they're outnumbered almost 2-1, and they don't know this is a false flag operation. As far as Marcus is concerned, he's defending against domestic terrorists. He doesn't know Wade is behind it. Thomas studied the tactical display, his mind automatically calculating fields of fire, choke points, defensive positions. Marcus set up a perimeter defense? Standard protocol, guard posts at main entrances, roving patrols, checkpoint screening. It's good for normal security, but against a coordinated military assault, it won't hold. He needs to collapse the perimeter, create layered defense in depth, turn the buildings into strong points. Hawk nodded. That's what we said. But Marcus won't listen to us. He's following the book, and the book says maintain the perimeter. Then I need to talk to him. Sullivan's expression turned grim. Thomas, there's something you need to understand. I haven't told Marcus you're alive. I wanted to a dozen times, but I was honoring your choice to stay dead. So right now, your son thinks his father is buried at Arlington. When you show up, he's not going to thank you. He's going to be furious. I know. Do you? Because I've seen Marcus when your name comes up. There's rage there, Thomas. Deep rage. He's angry that you died and left him. Angry that he couldn't say goodbye. Angry that his mother died alone. You walking back into his life, that's going to rip open every wound he's spent 14 years trying to heal. Thomas met Sullivan's eyes. I don't care if he hates me. I care if he lives. How do I contact him? Sullivan hesitated, then pulled out his phone. He's at the refugee center now, doing final security preparations. I can call, tell him we have a consultant who needs to brief him on potential threats. Do it. Sullivan made the call, putting it on speaker. It rang 4 times before Marcus answered, his voice clipped and professional. Colonel Sullivan, what can I do for you? Captain Brennan, I need you to meet with someone regarding the security situation at the center. Potential intelligence on the Cascade Legion. Send it through official channels. This source won't go through official channels. But the intel is solid. Trust me, Marcus. This is important. A pause, then, fine, I can spare 20 minutes. Where? The center? Main administration building. 1 hour. I'll be there. Marcus ended the call with saying goodbye. Sullivan looked at Thomas. You ready for this? Thomas thought about all the things he wanted to say to his son, all the explanations and apologies and justifications, all the words that wouldn't matter because actions were the only language that counted now. No, but let's go anyway. The drive to the refugee center took 30 minutes through Seattle traffic. Thomas sat in silence, watching the city pass by, trying to prepare himself for a conversation that had no good outcome. Either Marcus would listen and they'd work together to save lives, or Marcus would reject him and Thomas would have to protect his son from a distance, the way he'd been doing for 14 years. The refugee center appeared ahead, a sprawling complex surrounded by chain-link fence and guard posts. Rangers in full tactical gear manned the checkpoints, professional and alert. Sullivan badged them through and they parked near the main administration building. Want me to come with you? Sullivan asked. No, this is between me and my son. Thomas climbed out of the truck, his knees protesting after the drive. He walked toward the building, each step feeling like moving toward an execution. His execution, maybe. The death of Ghost, the death of Thomas Brennan, the hero, the birth of Thomas Brennan, the coward who'd abandoned his family. Inside the building, a ranger directed him to a conference room on the 2nd floor. Thomas climbed the stairs slowly, giving himself time to find the right words. He still hadn't found them when he reached the door. He knocked. A voice from inside said, "Come in." Thomas opened the door and saw his son for the first time in 14 years. Marcus Brennan stood at a table covered in maps and tactical displays, his back to the door. Army captain's uniform, Ranger tab visible, the bearing of a man who had earned his rank through competence and leadership. When he turned around, Thomas's breath caught. Marcus looked like his mother, Mary's eyes, Mary's smile, though he wasn't smiling now. But the jawline was pure Brennan, and the way he carried himself, that was Thomas's own stance reflected back at him. You must be Sullivan's consultant, Marcus said, professional and distant. I'm Captain Brennan. You have intel on Cascade Legion? Thomas stood in the doorway, unable to speak, unable to do anything except stare at the man his son had become. All the words he'd planned evaporated. All the explanations turned to dust. Marcus's expression shifted from professional courtesy to concern. Sir, are you all right? And Thomas did the only thing he could do. He told the truth. Marcus, it's me. It is your father. The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Marcus stared at him, expressions cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked like horror. What did you just say? I'm Thomas Brennan. I'm your father. I didn't die in Helmand. I've been alive this whole time. Marcus took a step back, his hand instinctively moving toward the sidearm at his hip. That's not possible. My father died 14 years ago. I saw the casualty report. I went to Arlington. I stood at his memorial. I know, I'm sorry, but it was the only way to keep you and your mother safe. Safe from what? Marcus's voice was rising now, anger bleeding through the shock. Safe from actually having a father? Safe from knowing the truth? Safe from General Clayton Wade. He tried to kill me in Helmand. He killed my entire team to cover up a weapons trafficking operation. If he knew I survived, he would have come after everyone I loved. You, your mother. I had to disappear. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. So let me get this straight. You faked your death. You let Mom think you were dead. You let me think you were dead. You missed my wedding. You missed Mom's funeral. And now you show up here with some crazy story about conspiracies and expect what? Forgiveness? A tearful reunion? I expect nothing, but you're in danger. Wade is behind the Cascade Legion attack. This whole thing is a trap to draw me out and kill us both. Get out. Marcus, listen to me. I said get out! Marcus's voice was a roar now, 14 years of grief and anger exploding. I don't care who you are or what story you're selling. My father was a hero. He died serving his country. And you, whoever you are, you're just some crazy old man trying to dishonor his memory. Get out before I have my Rangers throw you out. Thomas stood his ground. I can prove it. I know things only your father would know. I know about the scar on your left shoulder from when you fell off your bike when you were 7. I know you wanted to be an astronaut before you wanted to be a soldier. I know your mother's favorite song was Beautiful Dreamer, and she used to sing it to you when you couldn't sleep. Stop. Marcus's hand was shaking on his weapon now. Stop talking. You could have gotten that information anywhere, from old records, from people who knew us. That doesn't prove anything. Thomas slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out the dog tags he'd carried for 14 years. He held them up, letting Marcus see the name stamped into the metal. Brennan Thomas J. Blood type O positive. Religion Protestant. Marcus stared at the tags and Thomas could see the exact moment doubt crept in. The exact moment his son's world began to crack. Those could be fakes, Marcus whispered, but his conviction was wavering. They're not. And you know they're not. You know I'm telling the truth, Marcus. You can feel it. Marcus's face was pale now, sweat beading on his forehead. No, this is insane. People don't just come back from the dead. You're either lying or you're crazy, and either way I want you gone. Thomas took a step forward, and Marcus drew his weapon, pointed it directly at Thomas's chest. Don't come any closer. Thomas stopped, hands raised, looking down the barrel of his own son's gun. I'm not going to hurt you, Marcus. I'm here to protect you. I don't need protection from some old man with delusions. I need you to leave before I arrest you for impersonating a deceased service member. The door opened behind Thomas and Sullivan stepped in, taking in the scene with practiced calm. Captain Brennan, lower your weapon. Colonel Sullivan, this man just claimed to be my dead father. I know, because he is your father. I've known for 3 years that Ghost survived Helmand. He made me swear not to tell you. He thought he was protecting you by staying dead. Marcus's gun wavered. You knew, for 3 years you knew my father was alive and you didn't tell me? He asked me not to, and I respected his choice even though I disagreed with it. But circumstances have changed. The threat is real, Marcus. Wade is real, the attack is real, and your father is the only man alive who can help you stop it. Marcus lowered his weapon slowly, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Anger, betrayal, confusion. And underneath it all, it hurt so deep it radiated from him like heat. Get out, he said quietly. Both of you, I have work to do. Marcus, Thomas started. I said get out. I don't want to hear it. I don't want your explanations or your apologies. My father died 14 years ago, and I mourned him. Whoever you are, whatever you want, I'm not interested. Now leave before I have you removed. Sullivan put a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Come on, give him time. Thomas let Sullivan guide him out of the conference room, out of the building, back to the truck. He climbed in mechanically, his body moving while his mind replayed Marcus's face. The anger, the pain, the absolute rejection. Sullivan started the truck and drove in silence for several minutes before speaking. That went about as well as expected. He hates me. No, he's hurt. There's a difference. Give him time to process. He'll come around. We don't have time. The attack is in 3 days. Then we protect him, whether he wants our help or not. That's what fathers do, right? We protect our sons, even when they hate us for it. Thomas stared out the window at the Seattle streets, at the ordinary people living ordinary lives. Unaware that in 3 days, 4,000 refugees might die because a general needed to cover up his crimes and a father had made the wrong choice 14 years ago. Frank, what if I can't save him? What if I came back just in time to watch my son die? Sullivan's jaw tightened. Then we die trying to prevent it. But we don't give up. Not on Marcus, not on those refugees, not on doing the right thing, even if it costs us everything. Thomas nodded, accepting the truth he'd known since the moment he opened Sullivan's package. This was always going to end one way. Either he saved Marcus and finally earned the right to call himself a father, or he died trying and at least Marcus would know his father hadn't abandoned him. Either way, Ghost was done hiding. The old Marine Scout sniper was going back to war one last time, and this time the mission was personal. This time Thomas Brennan had everything to lose and nothing left to hide behind. This time he would show his son what it really meant to be a ghost. Not someone who disappeared when things got hard, but someone who appeared when the people he loved needed him most, even if they didn't want to admit it. The battle for Seattle had already begun, and the first casualty was the lie Thomas had been living for 14 years. Now there was only truth, and truth was the most dangerous weapon of all. The safe house felt smaller with 5 aging warriors and the weight of an impossible mission pressing down on them. Thomas sat at the kitchen table while Sullivan spread reconnaissance photos across the scratched surface. The Seattle Refugee Center stared back from the images, a sprawling complex that had once been a community college before budget cuts and declining enrollment had left it vacant. Now it housed 4,000 souls who'd fled wars that men like Thomas had fought in, and those same souls were about to become casualties in a different kind of war. Doc Martinez leaned over Thomas's shoulder, his reading glasses perched on his nose. At 59, Doc still had the steady hands of a surgeon, though they tremored slightly when he wasn't focused on a task. Perimeter's too exposed, he said, tapping a satellite image. Marcus has Rangers posted every 50 meters, but against a coordinated assault, they'll be picked off before they can establish overlapping fields of fire. Hawk Patterson nodded, his one good eye scanning the terrain features with the precision that had made him the best reconnaissance specialist in their unit. The other eye was glass, a souvenir from Ramadi that he wore like a badge of honor. Approach routes are wide open, no natural choke points. If I was planning this attack, I'd hit from 3 sides simultaneously, overwhelm the defenders, push straight into the main buildings where the civilians are concentrated. Which is exactly what Cascade Legion will do, Sullivan said. Intel from FBI surveillance shows they've been running rehearsals at a private compound in the Cascades. Military precision, 3 assault teams, 50 operators total, hitting at dawn on Thanksgiving when the center is hosting a community meal. Thomas studied the photos in silence. His mind was calculating trajectories, defensive positions, casualties. Always casualties. No matter how well you plan, people died. The question was how many and whether those deaths served a purpose or were just waste. Bull O'Brien, the largest of them at 6'4" and still powerfully built despite his 60 years, poured coffee for everyone with hands that had once wielded a machine gun with devastating effect. So what's the play, Ghost? We can't just walk in there and tell Marcus his security setup is garbage. He already thinks you're a crazy old man. He'll think we're all delusional. We don't tell him, Thomas said quietly. We show him. Rico Alvarez looked up from the demolition assessment he'd been conducting. At 57, Rico was the youngest of the old guard, but his expertise in explosives was unmatched. Show him how. We run our own reconnaissance tonight. Map the real vulnerabilities. Then we set up our own defensive positions without Marcus knowing. When the attack comes, we'll be the second line of defense he doesn't know he has. Sullivan frowned. That's operating without authorization on what's technically military jurisdiction. If Marcus finds out before the attack, he could have us arrested for interfering with a federal security operation. Then we make sure he doesn't find out, Thomas said. Frank, you can get us site access. Maintenance workers doing overnight repairs. No one questions contractors at 0200. I can do that, but Thomas, there's something else. Sullivan pulled up a different file on his laptop. FBI surveillance picked up communication between Cascade Legion and an inside source at the center. Someone's feeding them real-time intel on Marcus's deployments, patrol routes, shift changes. Someone close to the operation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. An insider was every commander's nightmare. The enemy you couldn't see because they wore the same uniform. Do we know who? Hawk asked. Not yet. FBI's narcoted to 3 possibles on Marcus's staff, but we don't have time for a proper counterintelligence investigation. The attack is in 48 hours. Thomas stood, his knees protesting the movement. Then we identify the traitor ourselves. Tonight, during our reconnaissance, we look for anything unusual. Any ranger who's where they shouldn't be, doing what they shouldn't do. We find the insider, we neutralize them quietly, and we close that intelligence leak before it gets people killed. Doc packed up a medical kit with practiced efficiency. What about Marcus? He's going to be on site. If he spots us, this whole operation falls apart. Marcus is focused on the perimeter. We focus on the interior. We stay in the shadows, do what we do best. We're ghosts, remember? We don't get spotted. Bull smiled for the first time since the briefing began. Just like old times. Infiltrating enemy territory, operating off the books, trusting no one but each other. Except we're not 25 anymore, Rico said. We're slower, louder. And if this goes sideways, we don't bounce back like we used to. True, Thomas acknowledged, but we're smarter, more patient, and we've got something those Cascade Legion operators don't have. We're fighting to protect innocent lives, not to advance some general's political agenda. That counts for something. The room fell silent, each man lost in his own thoughts. They'd all been here before, standing on the edge of a mission that could end badly, knowing the risks and accepting them anyway because that's what warriors did. They stepped forward when others stepped back. Sullivan checked his watch. Contractor access is cleared for 0200. That gives us 6 hours to prep gear and get some rest. I suggest we use them. But rest was elusive. Thomas lay on the couch in the safe house living room, staring at the ceiling, his mind refusing to quiet. Somewhere across the city, Marcus was probably doing the same thing, running through tactical scenarios, trying to anticipate every possible threat. The son had inherited the father's insomnia along with his sense of duty. At 1:30, they loaded into Sullivan's truck in a second vehicle Doc had borrowed from the Veterans Center. Maintenance uniforms, tool bags that concealed weapons, and surveillance equipment. Work orders that would get them through any checkpoint. They looked like tired contractors pulling a night shift, which wasn't far from the truth. The refugee center was different at night. The guard posts were still manned, but there was a quietness to the complex, a stillness that felt fragile. Inside those buildings, 4,000 people were sleeping, dreaming of safety, believing that the rangers outside would keep the nightmares at bay. Thomas and his team had to make sure that belief wasn't shattered. They badged through security with the work orders Sullivan had prepared. The ranger at the checkpoint barely glanced at them, just waved them through with the bored efficiency of someone pulling a midnight shift. Once inside the perimeter, they split up according to plan. Sullivan and Bull would check the main assembly hall where the Thanksgiving meal would be held. Doc and Rico would assess the medical facilities and evacuation routes. Thomas and Hawk would conduct overwatch from elevated positions, mapping sight lines and identifying defensive hardpoints. Thomas's knees complained as he climbed the exterior stairs of what had once been the library building. 4 stories of concrete and glass, now converted to administrative offices and meeting rooms. The roof access was supposed to be locked, but Hawk had the door open in 15 seconds, his lock-picking skills apparently immune to arthritis. "Still got it," Hawk whispered, his good eye gleaming in the darkness. They emerged onto the roof, and the entire center spread below them like a tactical map come to life. Thomas pulled out a spotting scope, the same type he'd used in Afghanistan, and began the methodical process of surveying every inch of the complex. From this elevation, the vulnerabilities were obvious. The main assembly hall had too many windows, too many entry points. The residential buildings were clustered too close together, creating corridors that would funnel panicked refugees into killing zones. The medical facility was isolated on the eastern edge, cut off from reinforcement if the attack came from that direction. Marcus had set up a decent perimeter defense, but perimeter defense assumed the enemy would politely attack from outside. Cascade Legion wouldn't be polite. They'd breach, penetrate, and be among the civilians before the Rangers could respond effectively. Ghost, Hawk murmured. Movement, southeast corner. Someone's where they shouldn't be. Thomas swung the scope to where Hawk indicated. A lone figure in Ranger tactical gear was moving through the shadows between buildings away from assigned patrol routes. The figure stopped at a service door, looked around to ensure no one was watching, then slipped inside. Follow? Hawk asked. No, mark the position. Get photos if you can. We identify first, then we decide how to handle it. Hawk pulled out a camera with a telephoto lens and began documenting the Rangers' movements. Over the next 20 minutes, they watched the figure emerge from 3 different buildings, each time checking surroundings before moving, each time avoiding areas where security cameras would capture clear footage. That's our insider, Thomas said with certainty. That's the one feeding intel to Wade. Can you make an ID from this distance? Thomas zoomed the scope, waiting for the figure to pass under a security light. When it happened, he got a clear look at the face. Young, mid-20s, earnest features that probably inspired trust. The name tape on the uniform read Hayes. Lieutenant Hayes, Thomas said. One of Marcus's staff officers. Probably has access to all the tactical plans, patrol schedules, defensive positions. So what's the play? Tell Marcus his lieutenant is dirty? Marcus won't believe me. He barely believes I exist. We need proof that's undeniable. Thomas thought for a moment. Can you track Hayes without being spotted? Hawk's smile was predatory. Do fish swim? Find out who he's meeting, what he's passing along, get it documented, photos, video, audio if possible. Then we bring it to Marcus in a way he can't ignore. While Hawk melted into the shadows to trail Hayes, Thomas continued his reconnaissance. He mapped firing positions, calculated fields of fire, identified where the old guard could set up supplementary defenses without interfering with Marcus's Rangers. They'd operate in the gaps, the spaces Marcus's conventional military thinking didn't account for. At 0347, Thomas's radio crackled with Sullivan's voice. Ghost, you need to see this. Main assembly hall, now. Thomas made his way down from the roof, his knees protesting every step. He found Sullivan and Bull in the large hall that would host tomorrow's Thanksgiving meal. Tables were already set up, decorations hung by refugee volunteers who tried to make the space festive. It looked peaceful. It looked safe. It looked like a death trap. Show me, Thomas said. Sullivan pointed to the ceiling. Fire suppression system. It's been tampered with. Someone disabled the sprinklers in this section, and they did it recently. The dust patterns show the panel was opened within the last week. Bull added, if Cascade Legion uses incendiary devices, this whole hall will go up like kindling. The exits are adequate for normal evacuation, but if you've got 400 panicked people and fire blocking the main doors, it becomes a mass casualty event. Thomas felt ice in his veins. This wasn't just an attack. It was planned massacre, designed to maximize suffering and death. Wade wasn't trying to make a point. He was trying to create an atrocity that would reshape national policy and eliminate anyone who knew the truth about Helmand. Can we fix it? Thomas asked. Not without someone noticing, Sullivan said. The system's monitored. We start repairs, alarms go off, and whoever disabled it knows we're onto them. Then we don't fix it. We plan around it. Doc, how long to evacuate 400 people from this hall if the exits are compromised? Doc had appeared silently, his medic's instincts drawing him to the tactical problem. Under ideal conditions with trained handlers, maybe 90 seconds. But you're talking about families, elderly refugees, small children, in a panic situation with potential fire and smoke. 5 minutes minimum, and that's optimistic. The attack will be over in 5 minutes, Thomas said quietly. If we can't evacuate them fast enough, we have to ensure the attack never reaches this hall. We need to stop Cascade Legion at the perimeter. Buy time for the civilians to get to hardened positions. 50 operators against 30 Rangers and 5 old men, Rico said, having joined them. Even with surprise on our side, those are ugly odds. Then we change the odds, Thomas said. He looked at each member of his team. Frank, can you get us access to the armory? Non-lethal deterrence, smoke, flashbangs, area denial weapons? I can make some calls. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we don't fight fair. We use every advantage we have, experience, terrain knowledge, willingness to bend rules Marcus has to follow. We set up a layered defense that funnels attackers into kill zones where we have overwhelming advantage. And when Marcus figures out what we're doing, Bull asked, hopefully by then we've saved enough lives that he forgives us. They spent the next 2 hours conducting detailed reconnaissance, marking positions, identifying weaknesses, building a defensive plan that existed in parallel to Marcus's official security setup. It was exhausting work for men their age, climbing stairs, crawling through tight spaces, their bodies reminding them constantly that they were decades past their physical prime. But their minds were sharp, their instincts were honed, and their determination was absolute. At 0612, as false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they gathered back at the vehicles. Hawk had returned with a memory card full of surveillance footage. Hayes had met with a civilian volunteer, passed documents, received what looked like payment. The whole interaction documented in high definition. "We've got him," Hawk said with satisfaction. "Question is, how do we use it?" Before Thomas could answer, headlights swept across the parking lot, a vehicle approaching fast. Thomas's hand instinctively moved toward the weapon concealed under his contractor uniform, but Sullivan put a restraining hand on his arm. "It's Marcus," Sullivan said quietly. The vehicle stopped 20 feet away. The door opened, and Captain Marcus Brennan climbed out, still in his tactical gear from a night patrol. He looked exhausted, running on coffee and duty. His eyes locked onto Thomas, and the anger there was palpable even in the dim light. "I knew it," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "I knew you wouldn't stay away." "What are you doing here?" Thomas stood his ground. "Protecting you. I don't need protection from ghosts and old men playing soldier. I need you gone before you compromise my operation." "Your operation is compromised," Thomas said flatly. He nodded to Hawk, who held up the camera. "One of your officers is dirty, Lieutenant Hayes. He's been feeding intelligence to the people planning to attack this center." Marcus's expression flickered, doubt warring with anger. "That's impossible. Hayes has been with me for 8 months. He's solid." "Watch the footage," Thomas said. "Then tell me he's solid." For a long moment, Marcus didn't move. Then he strode forward, took the camera from Hawk, and reviewed the images. Thomas watched his son's face as realization set in. The anger didn't fade, but it shifted focus. "This was taken tonight," Marcus said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes. You've been conducting unauthorized surveillance on my operation. We've been keeping you alive." Marcus handed the camera back to Hawk, his jaw working. "You have no authority here. No jurisdiction. You're civilians conducting illegal surveillance on a federal security operation. I could have all of you arrested." "You could," Thomas agreed. "But while you're processing paperwork, Cascade Legion is finalizing their attack plan, a plan Hayes just updated them on, including the fire suppression system that's been disabled in the main assembly hall." That got Marcus's attention. "What are you talking about?" Sullivan stepped forward, his rank and experience giving him credibility that Thomas lacked with Marcus. "Captain, someone sabotaged the sprinkler system in the hall where you're hosting the Thanksgiving meal. If the attackers use incendiary devices, you'll have a mass casualty event." Marcus pulled out his radio. "This is Brennan. I need a maintenance team to inspect the fire suppression system in Assembly Hall 1 immediately. Full diagnostic." He looked back at Thomas and the old guard, suspicion and calculation warring in his expression. "If you're lying about any of this, if this is some elaborate manipulation, I will have you in federal custody so fast." "We're not lying," Thomas said quietly. "Everything we've done tonight has been to protect you and the people in this center. You don't have to trust me as your father, but trust me as a Marine who spent 30 years learning how to keep people alive in impossible situations." Marcus's radio crackled. "Captain, we've got a problem. Fire suppression in Assembly Hall 1 has been manually disabled. Someone accessed the panel within the last 72 hours. Marcus closed his eyes and Thomas could see him recalibrating, accepting that the threat was real and more complex than he'd anticipated. When he opened his eyes, the anger was still there, but it was focused now. "All right, you've got my attention. What else did you find?" They spent the next 30 minutes briefing Marcus on everything they had observed. The perimeter vulnerabilities, the approach routes Cascade Legion would likely use, the timing and probable tactics based on their training patterns. Marcus listened without interrupting, his tactical mind processing information even as his personal feelings about Thomas remained frozen. When they finished, Marcus was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Your assessment matches some concerns I've had, but couldn't justify changing our defensive posture without concrete threat intel. If what you're saying is accurate, we're not prepared for a coordinated military assault." "You're prepared for what you were told to expect," Thomas said. "Domestic terrorists with limited training, but Wade didn't send amateurs. He sent professionals who know how Rangers think and how to counter Ranger tactics." So what do you recommend? It was the first time Marcus had asked Thomas for anything, and the weight of that moment wasn't lost on either of them. This was a son asking a father for help, even if he wouldn't admit it in those terms. Collapse your perimeter, Thomas said. Pull your Rangers back to hardened defensive positions inside the complex. Let the attackers commit to their approach routes, then hit them from elevated positions where you have advantage. Use the buildings as force multipliers. That goes against doctrine. We're supposed to maintain standoff distance, engage threats before they reach the civilian population. Doctrine assumes you have force parity or superiority. You don't. Doctrine also assumes the enemy follows rules of engagement. They won't. So we adapt. We use unconventional tactics. We make them fight our way instead of fighting their way. Marcus shook his head. I can't just abandon doctrine based on the word of a man who's been dead for 14 years in a group of veterans who have no official standing. Then don't base it on our word. Base it on the evidence. Hayes' betrayal, the sabotaged fire suppression, the attack timeline that matches everything we've told you. The choice is yours, Marcus. Follow the book and hope Wade's people make mistakes, or adapt to the real threat and give yourself a fighting chance. Sullivan added, Captain, I know this is difficult, but I've known your father for 30 years. When he tells you there's a better way to keep people alive, you should listen. Marcus looked at Sullivan, at the old guard, at Thomas. Thomas could see the internal struggle, the military officer warring with the grieving son, the need for tactical flexibility fighting against years of resentment and hurt. Finally, Marcus said, I will review your tactical assessment, but I'm not making any changes to my deployment based solely on this conversation. I need time to verify the intelligence, to assess the risk. We don't have time, Thomas said. The attack is tomorrow morning. Then I'll work fast. But I'm not turning over my command to a group of unauthorized civilians, no matter how well-intentioned you might be. Thomas nodded slowly. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't complete rejection either. It was the opening he needed. Understood, but when the attack comes, we're going to win here. In positions you don't know about, watching angles you can't cover. We're not asking your permission. We're telling you as a courtesy. Marcus's jaw tightened. That's obstruction of a federal operation. That's 5 old Marines who won't stand by and watch innocent people die when we can do something about it. Court-martial us later if you want, but tomorrow we fight. For a moment, Thomas thought Marcus might actually try to arrest them, but instead his son just looked tired, overwhelmed by responsibilities he'd never expected and revelations he couldn't process. Stay out of my way, Marcus said finally. And if your intel is wrong, if this turns into a circus because you've interfered with my operation, I'll make sure you spend your remaining years in Leavenworth. Fair enough. Marcus walked back to his vehicle, paused with his hand on the door. Without turning around, he said, the scar on my shoulder from the bike accident when I was 7, you were deployed when it happened. Mom called you and you talked to me from halfway around the world, told me scars made you stronger because they proved you survived something hard. I still remember that conversation. Thomas felt his throat tighten. So do I. Marcus got in his vehicle and drove away without another word. Sullivan put a hand on Thomas's shoulder. That's progress. Is it? He still hates me. No, he still hurts. There's a difference, and he's starting to see that maybe the man who abandoned him isn't the same as the man who's here now trying to save him. They returned to the safe house as the sun climbed higher, painting Seattle in shades of gold and gray. Thomas hadn't slept in 24 hours, and his body was screaming for rest. But his mind wouldn't stop running tactical scenarios, calculating odds, preparing for a battle that would determine whether Marcus would live to hate him another day. At 11:47, Thomas's burner phone buzzed. Unknown number, he answered cautiously. Thomas Brennan? A woman's voice, professional but with an undercurrent of emotion. Who is this? Someone who thought you were dead. Someone who's been investigating General Wade for a decade. Someone who needs to talk to you before tomorrow's attack. Thomas felt recognition tugging at the edges of memory. That voice. He knew that voice from another life. Who are you? Meet me at Pike Place Market in 1 hour. North End near the fish vendors. Come alone. I'll find you. The line went dead. Thomas stared at the phone, possibilities churning through his mind. It could be a trap. Wade could have figured out he was in saddle, could be using someone from his past to draw him into the open. Or it could be exactly what the caller claimed, someone with information that could change everything. Problem? Sullivan asked. Maybe, or maybe an opportunity. Someone wants to meet. Says they've been investigating Wade. Could be CIA, could be FBI, could be Wade's people setting a trap. I know, but they knew I was alive. They called me by name. Doc looked up from the medical supplies he was organizing. You going? Yeah, but I'm taking backup. Hawk, you're with me. Everyone else continue mission prep. If this goes sideways, the plan doesn't change. Pike Place Market at midday was crowded with tourists and locals, the smell of fresh fish and baked goods filling the air. Thomas moved through the crowd slowly, his eyes scanning for threats, for surveillance, for anything that felt wrong. Hawk was somewhere behind him, invisible but watching. Near the fish vendors, Thomas stopped and waited. He didn't have to wait long. A woman approached from his left, medium height, Asian features, professional attire that marked her as business rather than tourist. She was carrying a messenger bag and a coffee she didn't drink. When she got close enough, Thomas's breath caught. Rachel Chen, he said softly. She stopped 3 feet away, her eyes scanning his face with the intensity of someone who'd studied photographs but never expected to see the real thing. You look older than your photos. I'm older, 14 years older. I thought you died in Helmand. I thought you died too. Apparently we were both wrong. Rachel gestured to a nearby bench. Can we sit? We don't have much time. They sat, and for a moment neither spoke. Rachel Chen had been Lieutenant Rachel Chen when Thomas knew her, Marine intelligence officer assigned to support his team in Afghanistan. She'd been brilliant, fearless, and had developed intelligence packages that had saved dozens of lives. The last time he'd seen her, she'd been coordinating their observation mission of Wade's weapons trafficking operation. The mission that had ended with an airstrike that killed everyone but Thomas. How did you survive? Thomas asked. I wasn't in the compound when the bombs hit. I was 2 clicks east, running counter-surveillance on Wade's people. When I saw the airstrike, I knew what it meant. Wade was eliminating witnesses, so I did what you did. I disappeared. For 14 years? Not exactly. I came back 2 years later with a new identity. Rachel Chen, war correspondent. It gave me cover to investigate conflicts, to dig into military corruption, to track Wade's activities without him knowing I was watching. Thomas studied her face, seeing the same determination that had made her such an effective intelligence officer. You've been investigating Wade all this time. Not just Wade, the entire network. Arms trafficking, political corruption, generals profiting from endless war. Wade's just the visible piece. There are others, senators, defense contractors, foreign intermediaries. It's bigger than Helmand, Thomas. Helmand was just one operation in a system that's been running for decades. She pulled a tablet from her messenger bag, brought up files that made Thomas's chest tighten. Photographs, financial records, communications, years of intelligence work documenting a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and military. I have enough evidence to bring down Wade and a dozen others, Rachel said. But I need a witness, someone who was there, who saw the weapons trafficking firsthand, who can testify to Wade's role in the Helmand massacre. Someone with credibility. I'm legally dead, which makes your testimony even more powerful. The Marine who died to protect his family from a corrupt general. The ghost who came back to seek justice for his murdered team. The optics alone would force the investigation that Wade's political connections have blocked for years. Thomas looked at the evidence on the tablet, evidence that represented a decade of Rachel's life. Her own form of service continued through different means. Why now? Why approach me now? Because tomorrow Wade's going to kill your son and 4,000 innocent people. And even if we stop the attack, Wade will try again. He'll keep trying until Marcus is dead and you're dead, and anyone who can expose him is eliminated. The only way to end this is to destroy Wade completely. Public testimony, criminal prosecution, the end of his career and his freedom. And you think my testimony is the key? I know it is, but, Thomas, testifying means going public. It means Marcus learning everything. It means the world knowing you faked your death. It means facing consequences you have avoided for 14 years. Thomas watched the market crowds, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Tomorrow, 4,000 people, just as ordinary, would be in danger because of choices he'd made, secrets he'd kept, a general's corruption he'd tried to stop once and failed. If I testify, if I go public, Wade goes down. Wade and everyone connected to him. I have prosecutors ready, federal investigators who've been waiting for years for a case they could actually prosecute. Your testimony makes that possible. Thomas thought about Marcus, about the look on his son's face when he'd talked about the bike accident scar. about 14 years of grief and anger that would only be compounded by a very public revelation of his father's choices. But he also thought about 12 Marines who died in Helmand, about thousands of soldiers killed by weapons Wade had trafficked, about a system of corruption that would continue unless someone had the courage to stand up and tell the truth. Consequences be damned. After tomorrow, Thomas said, after we stop the attack and Marcus is safe, then I'll testify. I'll tell everything. Rachel nodded slowly. That's all I can ask. But Thomas, there's something else you need to know. The Cascade Legion assault. It's not 50 operators. My sources say Wade's increased the force to 200. He's using a private military contractor called Iron Wolves. Former Tier 1 operators, heavily armed, coordinated assault. Tomorrow isn't going to be a firefight. It's going to be a slaughter unless Marcus is prepared for what's really coming. 200. The number hit Thomas like a physical blow. Marcus had 30 Rangers. The old guard was 5 aging Marines. Against 200 professional mercenaries, the math was brutal. Does Marcus know? No, the intel just came through this morning. I was going to pass it through FBI channels, but by the time it gets verified and reaches the right people, it'll be too late. Thomas pulled out his phone, started to call Marcus, then stopped. Marcus had made it clear he didn't want help from his father. But this wasn't about their relationship anymore. This was about survival. He dialed. Marcus answered on the third ring. What do you want? The threat assessment is wrong. Cascade Legion isn't 50 operators. It's 200. Iron Wolves private military contractor. Former special operations, heavily armed, assault force level tactics. Silence on the line, then. Where are you getting this intelligence? From someone who's been tracking Wade for 10 years. Someone with sources inside the contracting community. That's not good enough. I need verified intel through official channels. Marcus, by the time official channels verify this, those 200 mercenaries will be inside your perimeter. You need to prepare now. I need evidence I can act on, not rumors from anonymous sources. Rachel was watching Thomas, understanding dawning in her eyes. She pulled out her phone, made a call. This is Rachel Chen, credentialed correspondent for Pacific News Network. I need to speak to Captain Marcus Brennan at Seattle Refugee Center regarding critical threat intelligence. Transfer me now. Marcus's phone rang while he was still on the line with Thomas. Thomas could hear the confusion in his son's voice. Hold on, I'm getting another call. A moment later, Marcus was back. There's a reporter who says she has intelligence about the attack. Do you know anything about this? That's my source. Listen to what she has to say, then decide if you can afford to ignore it. Thomas hung up, letting Rachel make her case. She had credentials, professional reputation, evidence that would carry more weight than anything Thomas could provide. They sat on the bench while Rachel talked to Marcus, presenting intelligence that she'd spent years gathering. Thomas watched her work, impressed by her calm professionalism, even as she was potentially saving thousands of lives. When she ended the call, she looked at Thomas. He's listening. He's skeptical, but he's listening. He's going to request additional support from Joint Base Lewis McChord, activate reserve protocols, but it'll take time. Time we don't have. No, which means tomorrow, you and your team are going to be the difference between a successful defense and a massacre. Thomas stood, his knees protesting after sitting. Then we better make sure we're ready. Rachel stood as well. Thomas, for what it's worth, I think you made the right call 14 years ago. Going into hiding kept your family alive. But now you're getting a second chance to be the man your son needs. Don't waste it. I don't plan to. They parted ways, Rachel disappearing into the market crowds, Thomas returning to where Hawk waited in a coffee shop across the street. The old reconnaissance specialist fell into step beside him. Intel source? Hawk asked. Old friend, Marine Intelligence. She's been tracking Wade since Helmand. Can we trust her? Thomas thought about Rachel's decade of investigation, her willingness to risk exposure by contacting him, her determination to stop Wade even if it meant revealing her own survival. Yeah, we can trust her. They returned to the safe house to find the rest of the team deep in mission preparation. Weapons cleaned and loaded, medical supplies organized, communications equipment tested, maps marked with defensive positions and fields of fire. The old guard preparing for one last battle like they were still the young Marines who'd fought together in Fallujah. Sullivan looked up as Thomas entered. We've got a problem. Hayes is missing. Marcus tried to detain him for questioning after we provided the surveillance evidence. Hayes pulled his sidearm, wounded 2 Rangers, and escaped. He's in the wind. He'll contact Wade, Thomas said. Warn him that we're on to the sabotage, that Marcus is reinforcing his defenses. Which means Wade might move up the timeline, Doc said. Hit tonight instead of waiting for Thanksgiving morning. Thomas shook his head. No, Wade wants maximum casualties, maximum media impact. That only happens when the center is full for the Thanksgiving meal. He'll stick to the original timeline. But Hayes running means we've lost our window to feed false intelligence. Wade knows we're prepared, so he'll adjust his tactics. To what? Rico asked. To overwhelming force, Thomas said grimly. Rachel Chen just confirmed the assault force's 200 operators, not 50. Iron Wolves contractor team, former special operations. We're not facing terrorists anymore. We're facing professionals who know exactly how we think. The room went quiet. Bull set down the machine gun he'd been cleaning. Doc's hands stilled on the medical supplies. Even Sullivan looked shaken. 200 against 35 total defenders, Hawk said quietly. That's not a fight. That's an execution. It is if we fight conventionally, Thomas agreed. But we're not going to fight conventionally. We're going to do what we've always done. We're going to be ghosts. We're going to use terrain, psychology, unconventional tactics. We're going to make them think they're fighting a force twice their size. And we're going to protect those 4,000 people because that's what Marines do. Sullivan stood, his command presence filling the room. All right, we've got 18 hours before the attack. Let's use every minute. Final equipment check. Review of defensive positions. Contingency planning for every scenario we can imagine. And then we get some rest, because tomorrow we're going to need every advantage we can get. The team dispersed to their tasks, the safe house transforming into a tactical operations center. Thomas found himself drawn to the window, staring out at Seattle's skyline. Somewhere out there, Marcus was making his own preparations, calling in reinforcements, adjusting deployments, carrying the weight of command that Thomas remembered all too well. And tomorrow, father and son would fight side by side for the first time in 14 years, whether Marcus wanted to admit it or not. Thomas touched the dog tags under his shirt, felt the worn metal that connected him to every Marine he'd ever served with, living and dead. Tomorrow, he whispered to the ghosts of Helmand, tomorrow we finish what Wade started. Tomorrow we get justice for you all. The city lights blazed on, indifferent to the battle being planned, unaware that tomorrow morning would determine whether 4,000 innocent people lived or died. Thomas turned from the window and rejoined his team, the old warriors preparing for one final stand. Because that's what Marines did. They stood when others ran. They fought when others surrendered. And they protected the innocent, no matter the cost. Tomorrow, Seattle would learn what ghosts could do. And General Clayton Wade would learn that some men couldn't be killed. They could only be made more dangerous. Thanksgiving morning arrived with deceptive beauty. The Seattle sky was clear and cold, the kind of November day that photographers loved and warriors dreaded because clear skies meant no cover, no concealment, perfect conditions for an attack. Thomas stood on the roof of the library building at 0523, watching the refugee center come to life below him. Families emerging from the residential buildings, children bundled against the cold, heading toward the assembly hall where volunteers had spent the night preparing a Thanksgiving feast for 4,000 people who'd fled their own countries to find safety in America. Safety that was about to be shattered. Thomas's hands ached in the cold despite the gloves. Arthritis didn't care about missions or timing. It just ground away at joints and cartilage with the patient cruelty of age. But when he lifted his M40A5 rifle and settled into position behind the low wall that edged the roof, his hands remembered their purpose. The trembling stopped. The pain faded into background noise. Through the scope, the world narrowed to clarity and distance, and the calculations that had once been as natural as breathing. Hawk was positioned 2 buildings over, his single eye no handicap when it came to reading terrain and identifying threats. Doc and Rico had taken positions on the ground level, near evacuation routes where they could provide medical support and demolition expertise if the assault reached the interior. Bull and Sullivan were in the assembly hall itself, disguised as volunteer coordinators, positioned to protect the civilians when the shooting started. Marcus had his Rangers deployed according to the revised defensive plan he'd grudgingly accepted after Rachel's intelligence proved accurate. Reinforcements from Joint Base Lewis McChord were inbound, but they wouldn't arrive until 0800 at the earliest. For the critical first 30 minutes of any assault, Marcus's 30 Rangers and the Old Guard's 5 aging Marines would be the only thing standing between 4,000 innocent people and 200 professional killers. The numbers hadn't improved overnight. They were still catastrophically outnumbered. But numbers only mattered if you fought the kind of battle your enemy expected. Thomas had spent 40 years learning how to win fights where the numbers said he should lose. His radio crackled with Marcus's voice, professional and controlled, despite the tension Thomas could hear underneath. All units, this is Brennan. Intel suggests attack window opens at dawn. Maintain heightened alert. Watch your sectors. And remember, these aren't amateurs. They're trained operators who know how we think. Stay sharp. Thomas keyed his own radio, the encrypted channel the old guard was using independent of Marcus's official communications. Ghost to all old guard positions. We're in the golden hour. Iron wolves will want to hit while families are gathering for breakfast. Maximum density in the assembly hall. Watch for reconnaissance elements. They'll probe defenses before committing their main force. Hawk copies, I've got eyes on the eastern approach. Nothing yet. Doc copies, medical station is ready. I've prepped triage areas in 3 separate buildings in case we need to disperse casualties. Bull here. Assembly hall is filling up. Roughly 200 civilians already inside, more coming. This is going to be a target-rich environment if they breach our perimeter. Then we make sure they don't breach, Thomas said quietly. The minutes crawled past with agonizing slowness. Sunrise painted the Seattle skyline in shades of orange and gold, beautiful and indifferent to the violence brewing. Thomas watched through his scope as more families entered the assembly hall, as volunteers served hot coffee and pastries, as children played in the courtyard despite the cold. Normal human life, fragile and precious, about to be tested in ways these people had thought they'd escaped when they fled their war-torn homelands. At 0647, Hawk's voice cut through the radio silence. Ghost, I've got movement. Eastern tree line, 4 individuals, civilian clothes, but they're moving with tactical spacing. Reconnaissance element. Thomas swung his scope to where Hawk indicated. 4 men dressed to blend with the morning joggers and dog walkers who used the park adjacent to the refugee center. But their movement patterns were wrong, too precise, too aware of sight lines and dead space. These were operators conducting pre-assault surveillance. All units, probable hostile reconnaissance on eastern perimeter, Thomas transmitted. Do not engage. Let them think we haven't spotted them. Marcus, you getting this? Marcus's response was immediate. Confirmed, I see them. Rangers are tracking but holding fire per your recommendation. The reconnaissance team spent 10 minutes mapping the exterior defenses, photographing guard positions, counting visible defenders. Then they withdrew into the tree line, and Thomas knew the clock was ticking down to 0. They'd reported back to their commander. The attack would come soon. At 0712, Thomas's phone buzzed. Text message from Rachel Chen, who was positioned in a media van outside the center's perimeter with camera equipment that doubled as sophisticated surveillance gear. Multiple vehicles approaching from 3 directions. Estimate 40-plus operators per vehicle. This is it. Thomas relayed the information across both radio channels. Marcus began repositioning his Rangers according to the defensive plan they'd argued about for 6 hours last night, collapsing the perimeter, pulling back to hardened positions, creating overlapping fields of fire that would channel attackers into kill zones. It went against every instinct Marcus had been trained with. Rangers were taught to maintain standoff distance, to engage threats before they reached protected assets. But standoff distance required force parity, and they didn't have that luxury. So Marcus was adapting, trusting in tactics that an old man with arthritic hands and 14 years of ghost stories had suggested. Thomas felt a surge of pride that he had no right to feel. This was his son making command decisions under impossible pressure, showing the kind of tactical flexibility that separated good officers from great ones. The vehicles appeared at 0719, not terrorist trucks loaded with explosives. Professional insertion, multiple civilian vans that wouldn't draw attention until it was too late. They parked at the planned assault positions Rachel's intelligence had predicted, and operators began deploying with the smooth efficiency of men who'd done this hundreds of times. Thomas counted heads through his scope, 43 from the eastern approach, 37 from the north. The southern team was still unloading, but it looked like another 40 plus. Close to the 200 Rachel had warned about. Each man armed with assault rifles, tactical gear, moving with the kind of confidence that came from extensive training and complete certainty in their mission. Iron Wolves. Former Tier 1 operators who traded patriotism for paychecks, who decided that protecting innocent lives was less profitable than killing them for the right price. Thomas felt a familiar cold settle into his chest, the emotional distance that had allowed him to take 89 lives without hesitation when those lives threatened people he'd sworn to protect. He'd promised himself he was done killing, promised his hands would never again squeeze a trigger with lethal intent. But looking at 200 mercenaries preparing to massacre families eating Thanksgiving breakfast, Thomas felt that promise becoming negotiable. All old guard positions, he transmitted. Iron Wolves are deploying. Estimate 120 operators visible, probably another 80 in reserve. They're setting up for coordinated assault from 3 sides simultaneously. This is going to get loud. Marcus's voice came through on the Ranger channel, steady despite what he was seeing. All Rangers, weapons free on my command. Wait for them to commit to their approach routes. Let them think we're a soft target, then we show them what Rangers do. The Iron Wolves began their approach at 0724. Not a headlong charge, but a professional advance, using cover and concealment, suppressing fire teams providing overwatch while assault elements move forward. They expected resistance. They expected Rangers. What they didn't expect was that those Rangers had repositioned overnight based on intelligence the Iron Wolves didn't know had been compromised. The first assault wave hit the eastern perimeter and found it empty. The guard posts Marcus had manned yesterday were abandoned, and for a moment the Iron Wolves hesitated, sensing a trap but unable to see it. That hesitation cost them. Marcus gave the command, Rangers, execute. From elevated positions in the buildings, Rangers opened fire with devastating precision. Not wild spray and pray, but aim shots from protected positions, every round counting because ammunition was finite and the enemy was numerous. Iron Wolves went down, their tactical gear absorbing some hits, but not all. The professional advance dissolved into controlled chaos as the mercenaries realized they'd walked into a more sophisticated defense than they'd anticipated. But these were professionals. They adapted fast. Suppressing fire pinned down the Ranger positions, while assault teams began breaching the outer buildings. The Iron Wolves had numbers and firepower and the willingness to accept casualties to accomplish their mission. Thomas watched the tactical picture develop through his scope. The mercenaries were pushing hard on the eastern side, trying to overwhelm that sector and create a breach they could exploit. Marcus was directing his limited forces to reinforce, but every Ranger he moved east weakened another sector. The northern assault team saw the opportunity and surged forward. Ghost to all positions, Thomas transmitted. Northern approach is pushing. They're going to breach the perimeter in the next 90 seconds. I see it, Marcus responded, frustration evident in his voice. But I can't reinforce north without collapsing east. I don't have enough people. You're not supposed to stop them, Thomas said. You're supposed to channel them. Let them through the north checkpoint. It leads straight into the kill zone Hawk and I have been covering. A pause. Then Marcus made the call. North sector, fall back to secondary positions. Let them take the checkpoint. The Northern Iron Wolves team, sensing victory, pushed through the checkpoint and into the courtyard between buildings. 30 operators moving in formation, weapons ready, expecting to encounter panicked Rangers falling back in disorder. Instead, they encountered Ghost. Thomas took his first shot at 0731. 800 meters, moving target, cold morning air, creating minimal distortion. The round took the lead operator in the shoulder, non-lethal but devastating to forward momentum. The man went down, and his team immediately took cover, canning for the shooter. They couldn't find him. Thomas was firing from a position they hadn't mapped, from a building they dismissed as non-tactical. His second shot hit another operator in the leg. His third disabled a team radio. Hawk joined in from his position, his shots equally precise, equally focused on disabling rather than killing. For 62 and 61-year-old men with bodies breaking down, their skills hadn't diminished. If anything, they'd evolved. They didn't have the physical stamina for extended engagements anymore, but they had the patience and precision to make every shot count. The Northern assault team was pinned in the courtyard, taking casualties from an enemy they couldn't locate. Their advance completely stalled. Iron Wolf's doctrine said never stay pinned in a kill zone. They should have withdrawn, regrouped, reassessed. But they'd been paid to complete a mission, and professional pride wouldn't let them retreat from 2 old men with rifles. Their mistake. Rico triggered the first demolition surprise at 0736. Not a lethal explosive, but a flashbang mine he'd planted the night before, positioned to disorient anyone standing in specific grid coordinates. The detonation wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to blind and deafen and panic. It succeeded spectacularly. The Iron Wolves team staggered, senses overloaded, and in that moment of vulnerability, Marcus's Rangers hit them from three sides with non-lethal but highly effective weapons. Tear gas, rubber bullets, sound cannons that created waves of debilitating noise. Within 90 seconds, the entire Northern assault team was combat ineffective. 30 operators down without a single fatality but completely unable to continue the fight. Northern approaches neutralized, Marcus reported, and Thomas could hear the shocked respect in his son's voice. Whatever you just did, it worked. Ghost protocol, Thomas replied. Use every advantage. Fight smarter, not harder. How's your eastern sector? Still under heavy pressure. They're not falling for the same trick twice. They don't have to. We've got more tricks. But even as Thomas said it, he could see the tactical situation deteriorating. The Iron Wolves' eastern assault had adapted, using smoke grenades to blind the Rangers' elevated firing positions, using sheer volume of fire to suppress resistance. They were pushing forward through discipline and firepower, and Marcus's Rangers were being forced back building by building. The Southern assault team had bypassed the perimeter entirely, circling around to hit the refugee center from an unexpected angle. They were heading straight for the assembly hall, where 200 civilians were trapped, unaware that death was approaching. Bull's voice came through the radio, calm, despite the circumstances. Ghost, we've got a problem. Southern team is moving on the assembly hall. I count 40-plus operators. Sullivan and I can slow them down but not stop them. We need reinforcement. Thomas scanned his scope toward the assembly hall. Bull was right. The Iron Wolves had identified it as the primary target, the place where they could inflict maximum casualties with minimum resistance. If they breached that hall, the mission failed. Simple as that. Marcus, Southern Assault Team is targeting the assembly hall. You need to redirect forces now. I redirect, the eastern sector collapses completely. The eastern sector is buildings and equipment. The assembly hall is 200 human beings. What's the priority? The silence on the radio stretched for 3 seconds that felt like hours. Then Marcus made the hardest call a commander ever makes. All Eastern Sector Rangers fighting withdrawal to Assembly Hall defense were ceding the perimeter. It was the right tactical decision, and it cost Marcus to make it. Thomas could hear it in his voice, the weight of giving up ground, of acknowledging that they couldn't hold everywhere, that sometimes you had to choose what to save and accept what you'd lose. But there was no time to dwell on it. The Iron Wolves Southern team was 60 seconds from breaching the assembly hall. Thomas repositioned his rifle, calculating the new range and angle. 900 meters, slightly elevated, wind from the northwest at approximately 8 miles per hour. His hands settled into the familiar routine, and the arthritis pain became irrelevant. He began taking shots with the methodical precision of a man who'd done this for 30 years. Each round aimed to disable, to wound, to reduce the enemy's combat effectiveness without killing. Shoulder shots, leg shots, equipment destruction. It was harder than lethal targeting, required more skill and patience. But Thomas had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. Hawk matched him shot for shot from the opposite angle, their crossfire creating a quarter of pain that the Iron Wolves had to push through to reach their objective. Operators went down, others dove for cover. The advance slowed but didn't stop. Professional mercenaries understood casualties were part of the job. They'd been paid well enough to accept the risks. At 0744, the situation changed catastrophically. A separate Iron Wolves team, smaller and moving with even more precision than the main assault force, penetrated the residential area on the center's western edge. Thomas didn't see them until they had already accomplished their objective. When he swung his scope to investigate gunfire from that sector, his blood froze. 12 children, refugee kids between the ages of 6 and 14, being herded at gunpoint by 8 Iron Wolves operators. The children were terrified, crying, some too scared to even make sound. The operators were using them as human shields, moving them toward a cluster of vehicles parked outside the perimeter. Hostages. The Iron Wolves were taking hostages. Thomas's radio exploded with overlapping transmissions. Marcus had seen it. The Rangers had seen it. Everyone understood immediately what this meant. All units, hold fire on the western team, Marcus ordered, his voice tight with controlled fury. They have children. I repeat, they have civilian children as hostages. Thomas kept his scope on the hostage team, his mind racing through options and finding none that didn't end with dead kids. The Iron Wolves were moving with professional efficiency, using the children as shields while maintaining perfect tactical spacing. Any shot Thomas took risked hitting a child. Any assault the Rangers attempted would result in immediate execution of hostages. This was the nightmare scenario every commander dreaded. The situation where training and firepower meant nothing because the enemy held innocent lives as leverage. "Ghost, what do we do?" Marcus asked. And for the first time since their reunion, there was no anger in his voice. Just a son asking his father for guidance in an impossible situation. Thomas watched the hostage team reach their vehicles, watched them load the children into 2 vans while maintaining security perimeters that made approach impossible. Watched his scope as one of the operators pulled out a radio and made a transmission. 30 seconds later, Thomas's phone rang. "Unknown number," he answered. "Is this Ghost?" A professional voice, no accent, could have been from anywhere. "Yes." "Iron Wolves team leader, we have 12 children. You have 90 minutes to stand down all defensive forces and allow our teams to complete their mission. If we encounter any resistance, we execute 1 child every 10 minutes. If you attempt rescue, we execute all children immediately. You have my word, and as a professional operator, that if you comply, the children will be released unharmed after our mission is complete." Thomas's hand tightened on the phone hard enough that the case creaked. "And your mission is to murder 200 people in that assembly hall. Our mission is what we're paid to do. Your choice is simple: sacrifice 200 to save 12, or sacrifice 12 trying to save 200. You're a tactical thinker, Ghost. You understand the mathematics. I understand you're a mercenary willing to use children as bargaining chips. I'm a professional completing a contract. The morality isn't my concern. The successful completion of the mission is. 90 minutes. Stand down or children die." The line went dead. Thomas looked across at the assembly hall, where 200 families were still eating Thanksgiving breakfast, unaware they'd just been sentenced to death by tactical mathematics. Then he looked at the 2 vans disappearing down the road with 12 terrified children inside. His radio crackled with Marcus's voice. "Tell me you have a play. Tell me there's a way out of this." Thomas thought about every hostage situation he'd ever studied, every tactical scenario he'd run, every impossible choice he'd seen commanders make. The mathematics were brutal. Stand down and guarantee 12 children to survive, but condemn 200 people to slaughter. Fight and save the 200, but guarantee the 12 die. Unless there was a third option. "How fast can you get reinforcements here?" Thomas asked. 20 minutes for the first elements from Lewis McCord, maybe 30 for full deployment. Not fast enough. The hostage team is mobile. By the time reinforcements arrive, those kids could be anywhere in Seattle. So what's your recommendation? Thomas looked at his team positions on the tactical map. 5 old Marines against an unknown number of Iron Wolves operators holding 12 children. The kind of odds that doctrine said you don't take because the risk of failure is too high, and the cost of that failure is measured in children's lives. But Thomas hadn't survived 40 years by following doctrine, when doctrine meant accepting unacceptable outcomes. "I'm going after them," Thomas said. "Old Guard is going to get those kids back. That's suicide. You don't know how many operators are with the hostage team. You don't know where they're taking the children. And you're 5 men in your 60s trying to conduct a tactical rescue against professional operators." 4 men, Thomas corrected. "You need Bull and Sullivan to help defend the assembly hall. That leaves me, Hawk, Doc, and Rico. 4 aging Marines against unknown odds to save 12 kids. Ghost, I can't authorize that. The risk to you and your team, the risk to the hostages if it goes wrong. I'm not asking for authorization. I'm telling you what's going to happen. You focus on defending those 200 people in the assembly hall. Hold the Iron Wolves off until reinforcements arrive. The Old Guard will handle the hostage situation. And if you fail, if those children die because you tried something impossible?" Thomas thought about Helmand, about 12 Marines who died because he trusted his chain of command instead of his instincts. About 14 years of living with the guilt of survival while brothers burned. If we fail, at least we tried. But we're not going to fail, because those kids deserve someone willing to fight for them, and the Old Guard is still capable of doing what needs to be done. "Thomas?" Marcus's voice was different now, softer, using his father's name for the first time since their reunion. "Be careful." "Always am. Keep the faith, son. This isn't over yet." Thomas switched to the Old Guard channel. Hawk, Doc, Rico, we're going hunting. Assemble at the North Perimeter access point in 90 seconds. We've got children to rescue. Ghost, are you insane? Hawk responded. We're not young anymore. This kind of operation is exactly what we've been training our whole lives to do, Rangers hold the line. Marines take the fight to the enemy. That's how it's always been. Get moving. Thomas packed his rifle, gathered his gear, and began the painful process of descending from the roof. His knees screamed with every step. His back protested the weight of equipment. His hands trembled as he gripped the stair railing. But his mind was clear. His purpose was absolute. Somewhere in Seattle, 12 children were being held by men who would kill them without hesitation if the tactical situation demanded it. And 4 old Marines were about to show those mercenaries why the term old guard didn't mean obsolete. It meant experienced, cunning, dangerous in ways young operators couldn't imagine. Hawk met him at the designated point, moving with the careful speed of a man whose body imposed limits his spirit refused to accept. Doc arrived 30 seconds later, medical pack on his back along with weapons. Rico was last, hauling demolition equipment that seemed too heavy for a 57-year-old man to carry. They looked at each other, 4 aging warriors about to attempt a rescue operation that doctrine said required a full platoon of operators in their prime. Thomas saw the doubt in their eyes, the awareness that they might be attempting something their bodies could no longer accomplish. But he also saw the determination, the refusal to let age or pain or probability stop them from doing what was right. We don't have a lot of time, Thomas said. Iron Wolves are mobile with the hostages. Rachel is tracking them using traffic cameras and commercial surveillance. They're headed east into the warehouse district. That's good for us. Isolated area, limited civilian presence, room to maneuver. Also means they picked terrain that favors defense, Hawk pointed out. They'll have the hostages secured in a hardened position with excellent sight lines. Standard hostage rescue doctrine says we need surprise, overwhelming force, and perfect execution. We have none of those advantages. We have experience, we have motivation, and we have the element they don't expect, which is they're expecting young Rangers to attempt rescue, aggressive assault, dynamic entry, speed and violence of action. They're not expecting old men to outthink them. Doc smiled grimly. So we don't fight their way, we fight Ghost's way. Exactly. Hawk, you're on reconnaissance. Get ahead of their vehicles. Identify where they're setting up. Doc, you're medical support and backup shooter. Rico, you bring your demolition kit, but nothing lethal. We're getting those kids out alive, and that means controlling every variable. And you, Rico asked? I'm the distraction. While they're focused on me, you 3 execute the rescue. That's a suicide mission. Only if I let them kill me, and I've been letting people think I'm dead for 14 years. I'm pretty good at not dying when it's inconvenient. They moved out, using Sullivan's truck that he'd left at the north access point. Thomas drove while Hawk navigated using the real-time intelligence Rachel was feeding them through encrypted communication. The Iron Wolves hostage team was taking a circuitous route, probably checking for pursuit, but they were heading consistently toward the industrial district east of downtown. They're stopping, Rachel's voice came through the speaker. Warehouse complex at the corner of Industrial Avenue and Harbor Road. 2 buildings, both appeared abandoned. They're unloading the children now. Thomas pushed the accelerator harder, his arthritic hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Every second counted. Every moment the children were in Iron Wolf's custody was another moment something could go wrong. ETA 7 minutes, Hawk said. But Ghost, we need a plan more detailed than you play distraction while we somehow magic 12 kids out of a fortified position. The plan is we adapt, we observe, we identify weaknesses, then we exploit them with the kind of tactical creativity that special operations stopped teaching when everything became about technology and protocols. They reached the warehouse district at 0812. The area was exactly what Thomas had hoped for. Abandoned industrial buildings, minimal traffic, plenty of cover and concealment. The Iron Wolves had chosen well for a defensive position, but they'd also chosen an environment where old-school infantry tactics would work better than modern dynamic entry procedures. Thomas parked the truck 3 blocks from the target warehouse. They unloaded gear with the practiced efficiency of men who'd done this thousands of times. Each movement economical despite the pain it caused aging joints. Hawk moved out immediately, his reconnaissance skills still sharp despite the eye he'd lost. He'd be in position to observe the warehouse within minutes, using natural concealment and patience that young operators never learn, because they were too eager, too aggressive, too confident in their equipment. Doc and Rico took supporting positions, using building angles and elevation to provide overwatch and backup firepower. Thomas checked his rifle one last time, confirmed his radio was functioning, then began the walk that would put him directly in the Iron Wolves' sightlines. He was 62 years old. His hands shook. His knees hurt with every step. His back was a constant source of pain that no amount of discipline could fully ignore. But through his rifle scope, he was still the most dangerous man the Iron Wolves would ever face, because Ghost didn't rely on physical superiority anymore. He relied on 4 decades of experience telling him exactly how young operators thought, exactly what mistakes they'd make, exactly how to turn their confidence into vulnerability. "Hawk to Ghost," the radio crackled. "I've got eyes on the target. 2-story warehouse. Hostages are being held on the 2nd floor northwest corner. I count 6 operators with the kids. At least 4 more on perimeter security. 1 vehicle parked outside, probably their extraction plan. Can you identify their team leader?" "Affirmative. Older guy, maybe 45, former military bearing. He's giving orders, others are deferring to him. That's my target. Once I engage their leader, the command structure fragments. That's when you 3 move on the hostages." "Ghost, this is insane, even for you. Insanity is letting children die because we're too scared to try. Get in position. When I call go, you execute." Thomas moved into the open, walking directly toward the warehouse with his rifle held casually, like he was just an old man out for a morning walk with his favorite gun. The Iron Wolves' perimeter security spotted him immediately. He could feel weapons being aimed at him, could sense the confusion as mercenaries tried to figure out what kind of threat a single elderly man represented. The warehouse door opened. A man stepped out. Early 40s, fit, professional bearing. The team leader. "That's far enough," the man called out. "Identify yourself." Thomas stopped 50 meters from the warehouse. "You called me 90 minutes ago, told me to stand down or children die." Recognition crossed the team leader's face. "Ghost, I didn't expect you to come alone. Where's your team?" "Exactly where they need to be," Thomas said. "I'm here to negotiate." "Nothing to negotiate. Stand down your forces or we start executing hostages." "You're not going to execute anyone. Because if you do, you lose your only leverage. And without leverage, you're just 8 mercenaries in an abandoned warehouse with nowhere to run." The team leader smiled. "We have escape routes. We have extraction plans. We're professionals, Ghost. We've thought this through." "Have you?" "Because I count 6 of you with the hostages, 4 on perimeter. That's 10 total. Your main assault force is pinned down at the refugee center. Your escape vehicle is a single van that won't get you 3 blocks before Seattle PD locks down every route. You're trapped, and you're starting to realize it." "We're not trapped. We're in a defensible position with human shields." "Children," Thomas corrected. "Not shields. Children. And if you think I'm going to let you harm them, you've badly misunderstood who you're dealing with." The team leader's smile faded. "You're one old man with a rifle. You're not a threat. Then why are your men so nervous?" It was true. Thomas could see it in their body language. The way they kept glancing at him, at each other, at their leader. They'd heard the stories about Ghost. Every operator who'd served in Iraq or Afghanistan had heard the legends. And now the legend was standing in front of them, old and worn, but somehow still radiating the kind of danger that made professionals nervous. "Last chance," the team leader said. "Walk away, or we execute the first child." Thomas raised his rifle, the movement slow and deliberate. "No, you don't. Because the moment you hurt one of those kids, you give me permission to stop trying to wound you and start trying to kill you. And at this range, with this rifle, against targets who don't know what real combat looks like, I can put rounds through all 4 of your perimeter security before any of you finishes aiming. That's impossible, even for you. Try me." The standoff stretched. Thomas could feel the tension ratcheting up, could see the team leader calculating odds and outcomes. This wasn't what the mercenary had expected. He'd expected Rangers. He'd expected negotiation and hesitation and the kind of tactical caution that modern military doctrine imposed. He hadn't expected an old man willing to call his bluff and capable of backing up the threat. "Hawk," Thomas transmitted. "Status? In position. Rico has demo ready. Doc has medical standing by. On your call." Thomas took a breath, felt his heart rate slow the way it always did before shots that mattered. The arthritis pain faded, the trembling in his hands stopped. Through the scope, the world became simple. Target, distance, wind, calculation, execution. 3, Thomas counted. 2, 1, execute. He took the first shot before the team leader could react. Not a kill shot, a shoulder hit that spun the man around and took him out of the fight. The perimeter security began to raise weapons, but Thomas was already transitioning. Second shot, third shot, fourth shot, each one precisely aimed at extremities and equipment. Bodies dropping, weapons clattering, mercenaries learning the difference between shooting at paper targets and being shot by someone who'd perfected the art over 4 decades. Simultaneously, Rico's demolition charges detonated. Not at the warehouse, but at the vehicles parked outside. Smoke grenades creating instant concealment. Flashbangs creating disorientation. A symphony of non-lethal chaos that was perfectly timed. Hawk and Doc moved like the professionals they'd always been, age slowing their bodies but not their tactical minds. They breached the warehouse from an unexpected angle, while the Iron Wolves inside were still reacting to Thomas's shots and Rico's diversions. Inside the warehouse, the 6 operators guarding the hostages were facing the wrong direction, focused on the windows where Thomas was firing from. They didn't see Hawk and Doc until it was too late. 12 children huddled in the corner of the second-floor room, terrified and crying. 6 mercenaries trying to process multiple threats simultaneously. 2 old Marines who'd spent lifetimes learning how to win fights where a single mistake meant death. It was over in 18 seconds. Hawk put down 3 operators with shots that were surgical in their precision. Doc took 2 more with the kind of calm efficiency that came from decades of combat medicine, teaching him exactly where to shoot to disable without killing. The 6th operator raised his weapon toward the children. That was his last mistake. Doc's final shot hit the mercenary's hand, destroying his grip and sending his weapon flying. The man collapsed, screaming, no longer a threat. "Ghost, we have the children," Hawk transmitted. "All 12 accounted for. All safe. Moving to extraction point now." Thomas allowed himself one moment of relief before movement caught his attention through his scope. The team leader, wounded but not finished, was reaching for a radio. Thomas's next shot destroyed the radio before the transmission could be made. "Stay down," Thomas called out. "You've lost. Your team is neutralized. Your hostages are free. Your best option now is to surrender and hope the federal prosecutors go easy on contractors who kidnap children." The team leader lay on the ground, bleeding from his shoulder, staring at Thomas with the kind of respect that only came from realizing you'd been completely outplayed. "You're Ghost," he said quietly. "The real Ghost. Not just stories." "The stories were always real," Thomas replied. "You just made the mistake of thinking age made them less true." Thomas held position until Hawk and Doc had the children safely loaded into the truck. Rico provided security while they drove away from the warehouse. 12 terrified kids gradually realizing they were safe, that the old men who'd rescued them were getting them back to their families. By the time Thomas withdrew from his position, Seattle police and FBI were arriving to take the Iron Wolves mercenaries into custody. The hostage situation was over. 4 aging Marines had done what tactical doctrine said was impossible. They'd rescued 12 children from professional operators without a single hostage casualty. Thomas climbed into the truck, his entire body screaming in protest. The adrenaline was wearing off, and every joint, every muscle, every injury he'd accumulated over 62 years of hard living was making itself known. But the children were safe. That was all that mattered. Hawk, driving now because Thomas's hands were shaking too badly, looked over and smiled. "Just like old times." "Old times we could do that without needing a week to recover," Thomas replied. "Details, we still got it done." They drove back toward the refugee center, where the battle was still raging. Marcus's Rangers were holding, but barely. The Iron Wolves' main assault force was pushing hard, and reinforcements hadn't arrived yet. "Ghost to Marcus," Thomas transmitted. "Hostages are secure. All 12 children safe and en route back to the center. Old Guard is returning to fight." Marcus's response was pure relief. "Copy that, Ghost. And Thomas, thank you. Thank you for trusting me to get it done. Now let's finish this. Those mercenaries are about to learn what happens when they threaten American families on Thanksgiving." The truck accelerated toward the sound of gunfire, toward the battle that would determine whether 200 innocent people lived or died, toward the moment when father and son would fight side by side for the first time in 14 years. The Old Guard was coming, and they were done playing defense. The sound of the battle reached them 3 blocks away. Not the Hollywood version of combat, clean and choreographed, but the real thing. The staccato crack of rifle fire punctuated by the deeper boom of explosives. The sharp reports of flashbangs mixing with the sustained roar of automatic weapons. The chaos of 200 professional killers trying to overwhelm 35 defenders who refused to break. Thomas gripped the dashboard as Hawk drove the truck through Seattle streets at speeds that would have gotten them arrested under normal circumstances. In the back, 12 rescued children huddled together, still crying but alive. Doc and Rico were with them, providing comfort and medical assessment, checking for injuries that thankfully weren't there. The children were safe, but the battle wasn't over. "Ghost to Marcus," Thomas transmitted as they approached the refugee center's perimeter. "Old guard is 2 minutes out. What's your tactical situation?" Marcus's response came through heavy with suppressing fire in the background. "Eastern sector collapsed. Iron Wolves have penetrated the outer perimeter and are pushing toward the assembly hall. We've evacuated most civilians to hardened positions in the residential buildings, but we've still got approximately 150 people trapped in the hall. Rangers are down to 60% ammunition. Reinforcements from Lewis McCord are 10 minutes out, but that might as well be 10 hours. We're coming in from the north. Tell your Rangers to watch for friendly forces." "Copy." "In Ghost, the Iron Wolves brought a surprise. They've got a 50 cal mounted on one of their vehicles. It's tearing through our defensive positions like they're made of paper." Thomas felt ice settle in his chest. A M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun in urban combat was a game changer. It could punch through concrete, destroy cover that would stop rifle rounds, kill people hiding behind walls they thought were safe. Against that kind of firepower, Marcus's defensive positions were death traps. "Can you suppress it?" Thomas asked. "We've tried. Whoever's operating that gun knows what they're doing. They're using shoot and move tactics, never staying in one position long enough for us to get effective fire on them. Then we take out the operator. Hawk, when we get there, that 50 cal is your priority target." Hawk nodded, his one good eye already calculating angles and distances. "I'll need a position with clear sight lines to their mobile gun platform." "The library building. Same roof we used before. You know the way." The truck screeched to a halt at the north checkpoint, which was now unmanned because Marcus had pulled every available Ranger back to defend the interior. The children were quickly transferred to a hardened position where other refugees were sheltering. Families reunited in tears and relief, parents clutching kids they thought they'd lost forever. Thomas didn't have time to savor the moment. He grabbed his rifle and equipment, his body protesting every movement. The hostage rescue had taken more out of him than he'd admitted. His knees were swollen, his hands ached beyond the normal arthritis pain. His shoulders felt like someone had driven nails through the joints. But 200 innocent people were still in danger, and his son was fighting for his life against overwhelming odds. Pain was irrelevant. "Hawk, get to your position and take out that 50 caliber. Doc, set up a casualty collection point in Building 3. We're going to have wounded soon. Rico, I need you to assess structural integrity of the assembly hall. If Iron Wolves breach it, I want to know if we can create controlled collapse to trap them inside." "That's insane," Rico said. "Controlled demo and an active firefight with civilians nearby. So is everything else we've done today. Get it done." They split up, each man moving toward their assigned position despite bodies that were decades past the age where this kind of operation should be possible. Thomas headed toward the command post where Marcus was coordinating the defense, weaving through corridors where bullet holes in walls told the story of how close the Iron Wolves had already come to victory. He found Marcus in what had been the community center's administrative office, now converted to a tactical operations center. Maps on the walls marked with symbols showing friendly and enemy positions. Radio chatter filling the air with reports of ammunition status, casualty updates, requests for fire support that Marcus couldn't provide because he simply didn't have enough people. Marcus looked up as Thomas entered, and for a moment their eyes met. Father and son, Ghost and Captain. Two men who'd spent 14 years apart, now thrown together in a battle neither could afford to lose. "Status?" Thomas asked, falling into the professional shorthand that was easier than dealing with emotions neither of them had time to process. "Bad and getting worse. Iron Wolves have adapted to our defensive tactics. They're using smoke to blind our elevated firing positions, then pushing assault teams through the concealment. They've taken the eastern perimeter completely. We've got Rangers holding at building to building fighting, but we're being pushed back incrementally. Another 30 minutes and they'll have clear access to the assembly hall." Thomas studied the tactical map, his mind automatically running calculations. You need to collapse your defense even further. Pull back to a final defensive line that you can actually hold with the forces you have. That means abandoning more ground, giving up positions we fought to keep. Ground is replaceable. Your Rangers aren't. Neither are the civilians. Consolidate your strength, shorten your defensive perimeter, make the Iron Wolves pay for every meter they advance. Marcus's jaw worked, the internal struggle visible. Giving up ground went against every tactical instinct, every lesson drummed into him at Ranger School. But Thomas could see his son working through the mathematics, accepting the brutal reality that sometimes retreat was the only way to survive long enough for victory to become possible. All right, we consolidate around the assembly hall and the residential buildings. Make them fight through a kill zone if they want to reach the civilians. Good. Now tell me about that 50 caliber. You said the operator knows what he's doing. Professional level. Former military for sure. Maybe former special operations. He's using the weapon like a precision instrument instead of just hosing down everything in sight, picking off our key defensive positions one by one. Thomas felt recognition tugging at his memory. A professional operator using a Ma Deuce with precision instead of suppressive fire. That took training and experience most mercenaries didn't have. Heavy weapons specialists who understood that the real power of a 50 caliber wasn't rate of fire. It was the psychological impact of knowing you could be killed through cover you thought was safe. The operator was using shoot and scoot tactics, firing calculated bursts from different positions, never staying exposed long enough to be targeted. Every burst was destroying Ranger firing positions with surgical precision. Concrete barriers that should have provided protection were being chewed through like cardboard. Rangers were dying not from direct hits but from spalling, the concrete fragments that became deadly projectiles when 50 caliber rounds impacted. This wasn't amateur hour. This was a master at work. I might know who that is, Thomas said quietly, his mind cataloging the tactical signatures. The positioning, the fire discipline, the way the operator was prioritizing targets based on threat assessment rather than opportunity. It reminded him of someone from a lifetime ago. Marcus looked at him sharply. What? The 50 cal operator. If he's as good as you're describing, it might be someone from the old days. Someone who knows how special operations think because he used to be one of us. Thomas felt a cold dread settling in his chest. The Helmand team had 3 exceptional heavy weapon specialists. One had died for certain, crushed under debris Thomas himself had seen. The other 2 were unaccounted for in ways that had always bothered him. Before Marcus could respond, Hawk's voice crackled through the radio. Ghost, I've got eyes on the mobile 50 caliber, and you're not going to like who's operating it. Thomas's chest tightened. He already knew somehow, the way you know bad news before it's spoken. Report. Carlos Martinez, former Marine Sergeant, your old heavy weapons specialist from the Helmand team. Hawk's voice carried the weight of recognition. Same firing patterns he used in Fallujah, same tactical signature. It's definitely him. The room seemed to spin. Carlos Martinez, one of the 12 Marines who'd been in the compound when Wade called in the airstrike. One of the brothers Thomas had thought died in that fireball 14 years ago. That's impossible, Thomas said. Martinez died at Helmand. I saw the casualty report. Well, he got better, and now he's working for Iron Wolves, using the skills we taught him to kill Rangers. Thomas felt the weight of another betrayal settling on shoulders that already carried too much. Martinez had survived somehow, had crawled out of the rubble just like Thomas. But instead of disappearing to protect his loved ones, Martinez had sold his skills to the highest bidder. Or maybe there was more to the story. Can you take the shot? Thomas asked Hawk. A long pause. Yeah, clean headshot at 700 meters. But Ghost, if Martinez is who you think he is, if he's one of the Helmand 12, maybe we should try talking to him first. We don't have time for counseling sessions. That 50 cal is tearing our defense apart. We also don't have time to create another enemy when we might be able to turn one. Your call, but think about it. Thomas looked at Marcus, who was listening to the exchange with growing understanding. You're talking about one of your old team, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Yes, man I thought died protecting me 14 years ago. Apparently he survived and went contractor. So what are you going to do? Kill him or save him? The question hit harder than Marcus probably intended. This was the choice Thomas had been avoiding for 14 years. Save yourself or save others. Protect what you love or expose it to danger. Trust people or assume betrayal. I'm going to talk to him, Thomas decided. If Martinez is one of ours, if he survived Helmand, then he deserves a chance to explain before we put him down. That's a risk. He could kill you while you're trying to negotiate. He could, but if there's a chance he's not really the enemy, I have to take it. Martinez was a good Marine, one of the best. I owe him that much. Marcus studied his father for a long moment. You're a better man than I thought. More forgiving. Not forgiving, just old enough to know that people are complicated and situations are rarely what they seem. Thomas switched to an open frequency that Martinez would be monitoring if he was running professional communications protocol. Martinez, this is Ghost. I know you can hear me. We need to talk. The 50 cal went silent. 30 seconds passed. Then a voice Thomas recognized despite 14 years came through the radio. Rough, tired, carrying the weight of hard years. Ghost, is that really you, sir? It's me, Carlos. I survived Helmand. Apparently so did you. Barely. Lost my left leg below the knee when that building came down on us. Spent 2 years in VA hospitals getting put back together with titanium and carbon fiber. You disappeared. Everyone thought you died. I had to. Wade would have killed anyone who knew the truth about the weapons trafficking. I went underground to protect the people I loved, while the rest of us were left to deal with the consequences. You know what it's like, sir? Being told your entire team died being the only survivor, and nobody believes your story about what really happened? Wade made sure I looked crazy, made sure my testimony was dismissed as trauma-induced delusions. I lost everything: career, reputation. The Corps medically retired me, and I couldn't get work because I was damaged goods. Thomas heard the bitterness, the pain of a man who'd been abandoned by the institutions he'd served. So you went contractor. I went where people valued what I could do instead of pitying what I'd lost. Iron Wolves pays well, doesn't ask questions, doesn't care that I'm held together with prosthetics and prescription painkillers. And now you're working for the man who tried to kill us. Wade hired Iron Wolves for this operation. You're helping him finish what he started at Helmand. Silence on the radio. When Martinez spoke again, his voice had changed. What did you say? General Clayton Wade. He's behind this attack. Hired Iron Wolves to massacre civilians so he can blame Islamic extremism and justify increased military intervention. It's the same play as Helmand, just bigger scale. You're lying. Iron Wolves Command told us this was legitimate counterterrorism, that we were stopping a domestic terror cell before they could launch attacks on American targets. Then why are you shooting at Army Rangers? Why are you suppressing forces defending refugees who fled the same enemies we fought in Afghanistan? Another long silence. Thomas could hear the grinding of gears in Martinez's mind, the cognitive dissonance of a man realizing he'd been manipulated into serving the very person who tried to kill him. Prove it, Martinez said finally. Prove Wade is behind this. Thomas looked at Marcus. Can you patch Rachel Chen through on this frequency? Marcus worked the communications equipment, and 30 seconds later, Rachel's voice came through clear and professional. This is Rachel Chen, Pacific News Network. I'm a former Marine intelligence officer who served with Ghost in Afghanistan. I've been investigating General Wade's corruption for 10 years. I have documented evidence of his weapons trafficking, his role in the Helmand massacre, and his coordination with Iron Wolves for this operation. Sergeant Martinez, you're being used to cover up the same crime that nearly killed you. Chen, Lieutenant Chen, I thought you died too. A lot of us thought of that about each other, but we survived, and now we have a chance to stop Wade permanently. But only if you stand down and let us protect these civilians. The 50 cal remained silent. Thomas could imagine Martinez in his position, wounded, bitter, realizing that his employers had lied to him, that he was on the wrong side of a fight that echoed the worst day of his life. What do you want from me? Martinez asked. Stand down. Convince your Iron Wolves team that they've been lied to. We can end this without more people dying. My team won't listen. They're professionals who complete contracts. The only thing that will stop them is overwhelming force or payment default. Thomas felt a spark of possibility. Payment default? Iron Wolves operators are paid through escrow accounts released upon mission completion. If the payment doesn't go through, the contract is void. And if someone could freeze those accounts, then we'd walk away. Professional soldiers fight for money. No money, no fight. Thomas looked at Marcus again. Can you get FBI to freeze Iron Wolves payment accounts? Maybe, but it would take warrants, legal process, verification. Could take hours we don't have. Rachel's voice cut in. I can do it faster. I have contacts in financial intelligence who owe me favors. Give me the account information and I can have those funds frozen in 20 minutes. Martinez provided the information and Rachel went to work. But 20 minutes was an eternity in urban combat. The Iron Wolves' assault continued unabated, mercenaries who didn't yet know their paychecks were being eliminated, pushing forward with professional ruthlessness. Marcus, we need to buy Rachel 20 minutes, Thomas said. How? Marcus studied the tactical map, his expression grim. We can't hold them that long with conventional defense. They've got too much firepower, too many operators. We'd need a miracle. Or a ghost? What are you planning? Thomas pointed to the assembly hall on the map. Iron Wolves want that building. It's the symbolic target, the place where the massacre will create maximum media impact. So we give it to them. You want to let them take the assembly hall? I want them to think they've taken it. We evacuate all civilians, make it look like we've abandoned the position. Iron Wolves commit forces to securing it. Then we trap them inside and hold them there until their payment evaporates and they realize they're fighting for free. That's insane. How do we trap 100 operators? Rico, he's been assessing structural integrity. If we can create controlled collapse at key entry points, we turn that building into a prison. Marcus shook his head. Even if we could pull off the demo timing, which is nearly impossible under fire, we'd be trapping civilians and rangers along with the Iron Wolves. Not if we evacuate everyone first, make it look like a retreat, but actually it's a trap. They'll see through it. They'll see what they expect to see. Rangers falling back under pressure. Defensive positions collapsing. The kind of tactical failure that happens when you're outnumbered 6-1. They won't question it because it fits their expectations. Marcus looked at his father with something that might have been admiration. That's a hell of a gamble. It's all we've got. 20 minutes to buy Rachel time to kill their payment. Then this becomes a negotiation instead of a slaughter. And if it doesn't work, if they don't care about the money, then we've bought time for reinforcements to arrive, and we fight our way out. But either way, we've changed the tactical situation from hopeless to possible. Marcus made the decision Thomas had been waiting for. Not just accepting advice, but trusting it. Believing that maybe his father's 40 years of experience counted for something. All right, we do it your way. But if this goes wrong, we're both going to die trying to fix it. I've been ready to die for this for 14 years. Nice to finally have my son fighting beside me when it happens. Marcus's expression softened for just a moment. Nice to finally have my father back. They didn't have time for more. Marcus began issuing orders to his rangers, coordinating a fighting withdrawal that would look like collapse but was actually precision tactical movement. Thomas contacted Rico, explained what they needed, and got confirmation that it was theoretically possible but insanely dangerous. I'll need 15 minutes to place charges and wire them for remote detonation, Rico said. And I'll need to do it while Iron Wolves are shooting at me. You'll have cover. Hawk and I will provide overwatch. You two old men against their entire assault force? We've faced worse odds. Get moving. Rico moved toward the assembly hall with his demolition kit, and Thomas returned to his overwatch position. Through his scope, he could see the Iron Wolves massing for what they thought would be a final push. Approximately 120 operators, still combat effective, consolidating for a coordinated assault that would overwhelm the Rangers through sheer numbers. They had no idea they were about to walk into a trap set by aging warriors who'd forgotten more about tactical deception than most operators ever learned. All Rangers, this is Brennan, Marcus transmitted. Execute phase Romeo. Fighting withdrawal from assembly hall positions. Make it look desperate. Make them believe we're breaking. The Rangers began falling back with the kind of controlled chaos that looked like panic to untrained eyes but was actually precise movement. Each Ranger knew exactly where to retreat, exactly when to provide covering fire, exactly how to make it appear that the defensive line was collapsing from overwhelming pressure. They left equipment behind, abandoned positions mid-firefight. Radio's chatter was deliberately panicked, designed for Iron Wolves to intercept. Iron Wolves saw what they expected. Defenders buckling under pressure, positions collapsing, the inevitable result of being outnumbered and outgunned. Their assault commander gave the order to exploit the breakthrough, to push hard while the Rangers were disorganized. They pushed forward eagerly, sensing victory, professional instincts telling them to press the advantage before the defenders could regroup. But professional instincts could be manipulated when you understood what professionals expected to see. The Iron Wolves were confident, disciplined, moving in perfect tactical formation toward what they believed was a shattered defense. They had no idea they were walking into a killing ground designed by men who'd spent 40 years learning exactly how to make good tactics into fatal mistakes. Thomas watched through his scope as Iron Wolves operators flooded into the assembly hall, securing what they thought was a strategic objective. He counted 75 mercenaries inside the building, saw them spreading out to establish defensive positions, watched them begin the process of securing a building they believed they'd conquered through superior firepower and tactics. Rico waited until the exact right moment, when the maximum number of operators were committed inside, when their focus was on securing the interior rather than watching their backs. Then he triggered the first charges. Not the main demolition, just enough explosives strategically placed to collapse the main entrance and seal the windows that could have been escape routes. Rubble blocked the doorway. Windows that could have provided egress were suddenly covered by carefully directed debris. The assembly hall had transformed from strategic objective into prison, and the 75 Iron Wolves operators inside realized it in the same instant. Their radios exploded with angry transmissions, professional composure cracking as they understood they'd been outplayed. Inside, trapped operators began looking for alternate exits that didn't exist, windows that were now blocked, structural weaknesses that the old guard had already reinforced. The trap was perfect because it had been designed by men who'd been setting traps since before most of these operators were born. Inside, trapped operators realized what had happened. Radio chatter exploded with angry transmissions, demanding to know how they'd walked into a trap. Outside, the remaining Iron Wolves assault teams suddenly found themselves cut off from their main force, facing Rangers who'd stopped retreating and started advancing. "Martinez," Thomas transmitted, "your people are trapped. 75 operators inside a building they can't escape from. No casualties yet, but they're not getting out until we let them out. Stand down and we can resolve this professionally." Martinez's response was pained. "You magnificent bastard, you actually did it. I had good teachers, you were one of them." Iron Wolves Command is losing their minds. They're ordering all units to assault the assembly hall and free the trapped operators. They can try, but they'd be assaulting a hardened position held by Rangers who are done retreating. The casualties would be catastrophic. Thomas could hear the calculation in Martinez's silence, a professional operator weighing odds and outcomes. Then Martinez made a choice that would save lives. "Iron Wolves Command, this is Heavy Weapons Team Leader Martinez. I'm calling tactical pause. Our main force is trapped, and any assault to free them results in unacceptable casualties. Recommend we negotiate terms." The response from Iron Wolves Command was predictable. "Negative, mission continues, all teams press the attack." "With what? We've lost 75 operators, our payment accounts are frozen, and we're fighting Army Rangers backed by Special Operations veterans who just outplayed us tactically. This contract is void. Payment accounts are not frozen. Continue the mission." Rachel's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Actually, they are frozen. Every escrow account linked to this operation has been locked by federal financial crimes investigators. Iron Wolf's corporate account is currently under Treasury Department seizure. You're fighting for free, gentlemen." The silence that followed was profound. Professional mercenaries processing the reality that their paychecks had evaporated, that they'd been lied to about the nature of their mission, that they were now facing federal prosecution for an operation that had turned into a complete disaster. One by one, Iron Wolf's teams began laying down weapons. Not surrender exactly, but the professional acknowledgement that the contract was void and continuing to fight served no purpose. Within 5 minutes, the shooting had stopped. 120 mercenaries standing down, realizing they'd been played by General Wade just as thoroughly as Ghost's team had been played at Helmand. Thomas lowered his rifle, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Through his scope, he saw Martinez emerge from cover, hands raised, walking toward the Ranger positions, with the careful movements of a man who'd survived too many firefights to make stupid mistakes. Marcus met Martinez in the open ground between positions, two warriors from different generations connected by the man who'd trained them both. Thomas watched through his scope as they talked, as Marcus gestured back toward where Thomas was positioned, as Martinez looked up toward the overwatch position with an expression that might have been respect. Then Marcus was on the radio. "Ghost, you need to come down here. There's something you need to hear." Thomas descended from his position, his body protesting every step. The battle was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. Federal agents were arriving to take the Iron Wolves operators into custody. Reinforcements from Lewis McCord were finally rolling in, 2 hours too late but present for cleanup and security. Refugees were being accounted for, medical teams treating the wounded, the enormous machine of official response grinding into motion. Thomas found Marcus and Martinez standing in what had been the assembly hall courtyard, now scarred by gunfire and littered with the debris of combat. Martinez looked older than Thomas remembered, worn down by years and injury and the weight of serving causes that kept betraying him. The prosthetic leg was visible where his tactical pants had torn, carbon fiber and titanium replacing flesh destroyed by Wade's airstrike. "Sergeant Martinez," Thomas said formally. Martinez came to attention, old habits dying hard. "Sir, good to see you alive." "Good to see you too, Carlos, even under these circumstances. I owe you an apology. I should have known Wade was behind this operation. Should have asked more questions before I took the contract. You were lied to by professionals. We all were. The important thing is you made the right choice when it mattered." Martinez glanced at Marcus. "Your son told me what you did, disappearing to protect your family, living as a ghost for 14 years. That took strength I didn't have. I should have done the same instead of going contractor. You survived the only way you knew how. No judgment from me." "There's something else," Martinez said, his expression turning darker. "Something about this operation that doesn't make sense. Iron Wolves was hired to conduct an assault, but the real objective wasn't the refugees." Thomas felt warning bells in his mind. "What do you mean?" "The trapped operators in the assembly hall. While you were coordinating the trap, I was monitoring their communications. They weren't just securing the building, they were planting something. Devices in the support columns and load-bearing walls. Explosives? Military grade. Enough to bring down the entire structure. Wade's backup plan, if the massacre failed, he'd blow the building anyway, kill everyone inside, and frame it as a terror attack that the Rangers failed to prevent." Thomas's blood ran cold. 75 Iron Wolves operators were trapped in that building, along with the explosives they'd planted. And if Wade had remote detonation capability, he could trigger those charges at any moment. "Can we defuse them?" Thomas asked. "Maybe, but we'd need explosive ordnance disposal specialists, time to assess the devices, and there's no guarantee Wade hasn't already set the timer." Marcus was already moving. "I'm calling in EOD from Lewis McCord, but they're 30 minutes out minimum." "We don't have 30 minutes, Martinez said grimly. "Based on the amount of explosive I saw them carrying, Wade could have set anything from a 5-minute delay to remote detonation. That building could go up any second." Thomas looked at the assembly hall. 75 enemy operators trapped inside, yes. But they were still human beings. Still men who'd been lied to and manipulated, just like Ghost's team had been at Helmand. And if that building came down, it would collapse into the residential buildings where refugees were sheltering. The casualties would be catastrophic. "We have to evacuate," Thomas said. "Get those Iron Wolves out and get the refugees clear of the blast radius." "The charges are on the support columns," Martinez explained. "Opening up the sealed entrances could trigger anti-tamper devices. We'd kill everyone trying to save them. Then we find another way." "Rico, you still on comms?" Rico's voice came through, exhausted but functional. "Here, Ghost, what do you need?" "Can you assess the explosive placement without entering the building? Figure out if we can do a controlled detonation that directs the collapse away from the residential buildings." "In theory, maybe, but I'd need to see the device configuration, understand the charge placement, and I'd be making a lot of assumptions that could get people killed. As opposed to the certainty that people die if we do nothing." Rico was silent for a moment. "Then, I'll need Martinez's intel on what he saw them planning, and I'll need Hawk's eyes from elevation to spot the charge locations through the windows." They worked with desperate urgency, Rico and Martinez comparing notes on explosive placement, while Hawk provided visual confirmation from his overwatch position. The picture that emerged was terrifying in its sophistication. Wade's team had placed charges with the kind of precision that suggested military engineering training, designed to bring the building down in a specific pattern to create maximum casualties and damage. But precision could be exploited. If they knew exactly where the charges were, they could trigger a controlled detonation that would collapse the building inward instead of outward, containing the blast and saving the residential structures nearby. It would also mean accepting that 75 men trapped inside would die. Enemies, yes, mercenaries who'd come to kill civilians, but also men who'd been manipulated, who'd made the choice to stand down when they learned the truth, who deserved something better than being blown up by the same general who'd hired them. There has to be another way, Thomas said. We don't kill them if we can avoid it. Ghost, if we try to evacuate them, the anti-tamper devices trigger and everyone dies anyway, Rico said. Controlled detonation at least saves the refugees. Unless we can bypass the anti-tamper systems. That would require someone inside the building with explosive ordnance expertise disabling the devices before we trigger the main charges. Someone who'd have maybe 90 seconds to work before the building comes down on top of them. Thomas and Rico looked at each other, both understanding what wasn't being said. Someone would have to go into that building, knowing they probably wouldn't come out. I'll do it, Rico said. I'm the demolitions expert. This is my job. You're 57 years old with a bad back and hands that shake from handling too many explosives over the years. You'd never get out in time. So what's the alternative? Let them die? Thomas thought about Helmand, about 12 Marines who died because of Wade's orders, about the guilt he'd carried for 14 years, about all the promises he'd made to himself about not letting anyone else die on his watch. I'll go, Thomas said. Ghost, no, Marcus's voice cut in. You're not expendable. You're the key witness to Wade's crimes. You die and Wade gets away with everything. I'm 62 years old with arthritis and a body that's breaking down. Rico has decades of life ahead of him. The math is simple. The math is you're my father, and I just got you back, and I'm not losing you again. The words hung in the air, raw and honest. Father and son facing the impossible choice of who lives and who dies. Before Thomas could respond, Martinez stepped forward. I'll do it. I know Iron Wolf's procedures. I know how they set charges, and I'm the reason they're in there. My team, my responsibility. Carlos, you don't have to do this, Thomas said. Yeah, I do, because I've been running from responsibility since Helmand. Been telling myself I was just surviving, just doing what I had to do. But truth is, I've been serving the same bastard who tried to kill us. Time to stop running and start making things right. Martinez looked at Rico. Talk me through the bypass procedures. Tell me what I need to do. They had 5 minutes of hurried instruction. Martinez absorbing information about anti-tamper devices and explosive configurations in the precise sequence needed to disable charges without triggering them. Rico drew diagrams on paper, explained the theory behind pressure release mechanisms, walked through scenarios where a single wrong movement would trigger instant detonation. It wasn't enough time for proper training, nowhere close to the weeks of instruction proper EOD technicians received, but it was all they had, and Martinez was a fast learner when lives depended on it. Martinez loaded up with tools and protective gear that wouldn't protect him if he failed. Body armor that could stop bullets, but would be useless against a building coming down. Wire cutters and multimeters and specialized tools for working with military-grade explosives. He checked each piece of equipment with the methodical care of a man who understood that forgetting something simple could mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure. He looked at Thomas one last time, and in that moment they were both young Marines again, back in Fallujah before Helmand, before Wade, before everything went wrong. Sir, tell the guys I'm sorry. Sorry I went contractor. Sorry I forgot what we stood for. His voice carried the weight of 14 years of choices he wished he could take back. You remembered when it counted. That's all that matters. Thomas wanted to say more, wanted to tell Martinez that he'd never blamed him for surviving, for doing what he had to do. But there wasn't time for absolution, and maybe Martinez didn't need it. Maybe walking into that building was absolution enough. And sir, make sure Wade pays for Helmand, for all of it, for the 12 we lost, for the lies that sent good men to die protecting a criminal's profits. I will, I promise. Thomas meant it with every fiber of his being. This was the promise he'd been making for 14 years, and tomorrow he'd finally keep it. Martinez limped toward the assembly hall on his prosthetic leg, carbon fiber and titanium carrying him toward a fate that should have claimed him 14 years ago. He was carrying gear that weighed more than a man his age should manage, moving toward almost certain death because it was the right thing to do, because some debts could only be paid in courage and sacrifice. Thomas watched through his scope as Martinez entered the building through a window, as he disappeared into the interior where 75 enemy operators waited alongside enough explosives to level a city block. The radio crackled with Martinez's voice, calm and professional despite the circumstances. I'm at the first charge, beginning bypass procedures. 90 seconds became an eternity. Thomas counted each heartbeat, each breath, imagining Martinez working with shaking hands to disarm devices designed to kill anyone who touched them. First charge is neutralized, Martinez reported. Moving to second position. More seconds crawling past. Marcus was beside Thomas now, both of them watching the building, waiting for either success or the fireball that would mean failure. Second charge neutralized. Third charge is the tricky one. It's got a pressure release anti-tamper. If I release tension wrong, it triggers immediately. Can you do it? Rico asked. Guess we're about to find out. Silence, 20 seconds, 30, 45. Then Martinez's voice, strained but triumphant. Third charge is neutralized. Explosives are safe. Get these people out before Wade finds another way to kill them. The relief was overwhelming. Rangers moved in to evacuate the trapped Iron Wolves operators. Men who walked out expecting to die, grateful to be alive. Martinez emerged last, exhausted, and was met by Thomas. You did good, Carlos. Carlos, you saved a lot of lives today. Just paying back a debt, sir. You saved my life at Helmand. Figured I owed you one. Debt's paid. Now help us finish this. Help us make sure Wade answers for what he did. Martinez nodded. Whatever you need. Around them, the refugee center was transforming from battleground to crime scene. Federal agents swarming, evidence being collected, the massive apparatus of justice grinding into motion. The battle was over. But the war wasn't finished, because somewhere General Clayton Wade was watching his carefully orchestrated operation fall apart. And Thomas knew desperate men made desperate choices. This wasn't over until Wade was in custody. And Thomas had made a promise to 12 dead Marines that Wade would answer for their murders. Tomorrow, that promise would be kept. Tonight, Thomas stood with his son and his brothers, watching the sun set over Seattle, grateful to be alive and ready for whatever came next. The old guard had proven that age didn't mean obsolete. It meant experienced, cunning, and more dangerous than young operators could imagine. And they weren't done fighting yet. The sun set over Seattle in shades of orange and purple, painting the refugee center in colors that seemed inappropriate for a battlefield. The shooting had stopped 3 hours ago, but the aftermath stretched on with the grinding bureaucracy of federal response. FBI agents were processing detained Iron Wolves operators. Army Criminal Investigation Division teams were documenting evidence. Medical personnel were treating wounded Rangers and refugees. The machinery of justice was in motion, slow and methodical, building cases that would take months to prosecute. But General Clayton Wade was still free. Thomas stood in the command post that Marcus had converted back to administrative office, watching updates stream across multiple screens. Federal warrants had been issued. Wade's Pentagon office was being searched. His bank accounts were frozen. His communications were monitored. The net was closing, but Wade hadn't been located yet. That worried Thomas more than the entire Iron Wolves assault had. Desperate men made desperate choices, and Wade had proven over 14 years that he was willing to sacrifice anyone to protect himself. The attack on the refugee center had failed. The Iron Wolves contractors were cooperating with federal investigators. Martinez was providing testimony about the explosives and Wade's direct involvement. Rachel had published her initial exposé, and the story was spreading through news networks like wildfire. Wade's carefully constructed career was collapsing. His political protection was evaporating. His legacy was being rewritten from distinguished general to corrupt criminal, which made him more dangerous than ever. Marcus entered the office carrying 2 cups of coffee, handed one to Thomas without comment. They'd been working side by side for 6 hours, coordinating with federal agencies, providing statements, ensuring the refugees were safe and the captured mercenaries were secured. Father and son operating as a team for the first time, falling into a professional rhythm that felt natural despite the 14 years of separation. FBI just confirmed Wade's not at his Pentagon office, Marcus said, settling into the chair beside Thomas. Not at his residence in Virginia, not at his vacation property in Colorado. He's gone dark. He knows it's over. He's running. You think he'll try to flee the country? Thomas shook his head. Wade's too proud for that. Running overseas would be admitting defeat. He'd rather fight, try to salvage something from the wreckage. Fight how? His mercenaries are in federal custody. His conspiracy is exposed. What's left? Revenge. If Wade can't win, he'll try to hurt the people who beat him. Me, you, Rachel, Martinez, Sullivan, the old guard. He'll want to take us down with him. Marcus set down his coffee cup, the movement careful and controlled. So what do? Hide? Wait for him to make a move? We do what Marines do. We take the fight to him. The FBI has jurisdiction. This is their manhunt now. The FBI is looking in all the official places. Wade's not going to be somewhere official. He's going to be where he feels safe, where he can plan his next move. Thomas pulled up a satellite map on one of the screens. Cascade Mountains, the compound where Iron Wolves was training. It's remote, defensible, and Wade knows the FBI will eventually search there, but eventually gives him time. That's speculation. You don't know he's there. I know how operators think when everything falls apart. They go to ground in familiar territory. Wade's been using that compound for months to coordinate the attack. It's where he feels in control. Marcus studied the map, his tactical mind already calculating approaches and risks. Even if you're right, we can't just assault a compound without federal authorization. That's vigilantism. I'm not talking about assault. I'm talking about reconnaissance. We locate Wade, confirm he's there, then we call in the FBI to make the arrest. And if Wade sees you coming, if he has security, weapons, contingency plans, Thomas met his son's eyes. Then we adapt, like we've been doing all day. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that took Thomas completely by surprise. I'm going with you. Marcus, no, this isn't your fight. He tried to kill my father 14 years ago. He tried to massacre 4,000 people I was sworn to protect. He spent years corrupting the military I serve. This is absolutely my fight. You're active duty. You can't participate in unauthorized operations against a general officer. You keep telling me I need to break rules when rules don't serve justice. Well, here I am, breaking rules, going with my father to find the man who destroyed our family. Thomas wanted to argue, wanted to protect Marcus from the consequences that would come from this choice. But looking at his son's face, seeing the determination there, he recognized something. This was Marcus choosing to stand beside him. Not because of orders or duty, but because of something deeper. Family. The bond that 14 years of separation hadn't completely broken. All right, Thomas said quietly. We go together. But we do this smart. Old Guard provides support. We have exit strategies. And if the situation goes sideways, you follow my lead without argument. Agreed. When do we move? Tonight. Wade won't wait for morning. Neither will we. They spent the next 2 hours planning. Sullivan coordinated with the team, positioning Hawk and Bull at overwatch points along the route to the compound. Doc and Rico would provide mobile support, ready to extract or reinforce as needed. Martinez, still recovering from his bomb disposal heroics but refusing to sit out, would monitor communications and coordinate with Rachel, who was using her media contacts to track any Wade sightings. At 2100 hours, Thomas and Marcus drove out of Seattle in an unmarked SUV, heading toward the Cascade Mountains. The night was clear and cold, stars visible above the tree line, the kind of darkness that felt absolute away from city lights. They drove in silence for the first 30 minutes. Then Marcus spoke, his voice quiet in the darkness. I need to know something. When you disappeared after Helmand, when you let us think you were dead, did you ever consider coming back? Did you ever want to tell us the truth? Thomas gripped the steering wheel, his arthritic hands aching from tension more than cold. Every day. Every single day for 14 years. But wanting something doesn't make it safe. Wade had eyes everywhere. If I'd contacted you or your mother, he would have known, and then he would have used you to get to me. So you sacrificed yourself to protect us. I sacrificed our family to keep you alive. I'm not sure that was the right choice, but it's the one I made. Mom died thinking you abandoned her, thinking you'd chosen war over family. The words hit like physical blows. Thomas had known Mary's death would come up eventually, had been dreading this conversation since the moment Marcus first rejected him. I know, and that guilt is something I'll carry until my last breath. But Marcus, if I'd stayed, if I'd told the truth and tried to fight Wade through official channels, he would have killed all of us. I've seen what Wade does to threats. He doesn't take chances. He eliminates problems permanently. You don't know that for certain. I know he ordered an airstrike on 12 Marines to cover up weapons trafficking. I know he's been planning this refugee center massacre 4 months. I know he has powerful friends who've protected him for years. Yes, I know for certain. Staying would have gotten you and your mother killed. Marcus stared out the window at darkness rushing past. Did you love her? Mom, I mean. Or was the marriage just part of your cover? I loved your mother from the moment I met her. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. Smart, funny, patient enough to put up with a Marine who was gone more than he was home. Losing her, even from a distance, even by my own choice, was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than Helmand, harder than living as a ghost, because I knew she was suffering and I couldn't fix it. She never remarried, never even dated. She just worked and waited and hoped somehow you'd come back. Thomas felt tears burning in his eyes, fought to keep his voice steady. I'm sorry, I'm so goddamn sorry, Marcus. I made the choice I thought would keep you alive, but I never stopped to think what it would cost her. Cost you. If I could go back, if I could find another way, I would. But I can't. All I can do is try to be the father you deserved for the time I have left. The silence stretched. Then Marcus said, she had letters. Letters she wrote to you after you died. Hundreds of them over the years. Never sent, obviously, but she wrote them anyway. Things she wanted to tell you. Things about my life, my career, my wedding, all the moments you missed. Do you still have them? Yeah. Couldn't bring myself to throw them away after she died. They're in storage. Could I read them someday? Marcus turned to look at his father, and in the dim dashboard light, Thomas could see his son struggling with emotion. Yeah, you can read them. She'd want you to know what she said. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. But it was acceptance, understanding, the beginning of a relationship that might never fully heal, but could at least move forward. They drove the rest of the way in companionable silence, and when they reached the access road to Wade's compound, they parked and continued on foot. Thomas's knees protested immediately. The terrain was rough, all rocks and underbrush, the kind of hiking that young rangers did easily, but that punished 62-year-old bodies with every step. Marcus slowed his pace to match Thomas's, and there was something touching about that consideration. His son moderating his capabilities to accommodate his aging father's limitations. Hawk's voice came through their earpieces. Ghost Marcus, I've got visual on the compound, single vehicle in the lot, lights on in the main building. I'm counting one occupant, matches Wade's description from the photos. Any security? Thomas asked. Negative. He's alone. Looks like he's packing equipment, possibly preparing to move. We need to move fast. If he leaves before the FBI gets here, we lose him. They approached from the northwest, using terrain and darkness for concealment. Thomas moved with the careful precision of someone who'd done this thousands of times, and he noted Marcus doing the same. Different wars, different training, but the fundamentals were identical. Use cover, move quietly, never silhouette yourself against the skyline. The compound appeared through the trees, a cluster of buildings that had once been a corporate retreat before budget cuts and bankruptcy left it abandoned. Wade had purchased it through shell companies, turned it into a private training facility where Iron Wolves had prepared for operations that would never appear on any official record. Through the window of the main building, Thomas could see Wade. The general was in civilian clothes, moving with the agitated energy of a man whose world was collapsing. Packing a duffel bag, checking a laptop, pacing while talking on a phone. He looked older than Thomas remembered, worn down by stress and the weight of crimes catching up to him. What's the play? Marcus whispered. I go in alone. You stay here with Overwatch. If things go bad, you call in the FBI and get clear. That wasn't the plan. The plan was, we do this together. Plans change. Wade knows me. Seeing me might throw him off balance, give me leverage for negotiation. You showing up just adds another variable. Or it adds backup in case Wade decides shooting you is easier than talking. Marcus, I need you to trust me on this. I've been preparing for this conversation for 14 years. Let me finish it. His son studied him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. 10 minutes. If you're not out or I hear gunfire, I'm coming in. Fair enough. Thomas approached the building openly, not trying to hide. He knocked on the door like a guest, 3 solid raps that echoed in the mountain silence. Inside, movement stopped. Footsteps approached. The door opened, and General Clayton Wade stared at Ghost for the first time in 14 years. Wade looked like he'd seen an actual ghost. His face went pale. His hand instinctively moved toward a sidearm Thomas could see holstered on his hip. But training and discipline held, and Wade didn't draw. Instead, he said, "You're dead. I killed you at Helmand. You killed 12 good Marines at Helmand. I survived. Been living as a ghost ever since, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to destroy you. This is that moment? This is that moment." Wade stepped back, gestured Thomas inside with the casual arrogance of a man who still thought he controlled the situation. Then come in, let's have the conversation you have been rehearsing. Thomas entered, his hands visible and empty, showing he wasn't armed. The interior of the building was Spartan. Folding tables, camping equipment, maps on the walls showing the refugee center assault plans. Evidence of conspiracy spread out like Wade didn't care anymore who saw it. You destroyed my operation, Wade said, closing the door. 20 years of careful planning, strategic positioning, building relationships with defense contractors and political allies. All of it ruined in one day because a washed-up sniper couldn't stay dead. It was ruined because you tried to massacre 4,000 innocent people. The operation was just insurance. Those refugees were strategic assets. Public sympathy for them was blocking necessary military action in the Middle East. One tragic attack, blamed on Islamic extremism, would have shifted policy overnight. We could have gone back in force, secured the resources we need, restored American dominance in the region. Thomas felt disgust rising in his throat. You were going to kill children to justify a war. I was going to sacrifice the few to save the many. That's what generals do. We make hard choices that lesser men can't stomach. Lesser men like the 12 Marines you murdered at Helmand, they were making hard choices too, fighting your war, following your orders, and you killed them to hide the fact you were selling weapons to the enemy. Wade poured himself a drink from a bottle on the table, his hands steady despite the circumstances. Those Marines saw something they shouldn't have. They became liabilities. I did what was necessary. You betrayed the oath you swore, the men who trusted you, the country you claimed to serve. The country betrayed me first. Wade's calm facade cracked, anger bleeding through. 40 years of service, 4 combat tours, strategic victories that saved thousands of lives. And what did I get? A desk job in the Pentagon, political appointees making decisions about wars they've never fought, bureaucrats cutting budgets while enemies grow stronger. I was trying to fix a broken system. By becoming part of the corruption you claim to fight, by doing what needed to be done when no one else had the courage. History will vindicate me. History will remember you as a traitor who murdered his own men for profit. Wade's hand moved toward his weapon. I could shoot you right now. Self-defense. Crazy veteran broke into my compound making wild accusations. No witnesses. Your conspiracy theories die with you. Thomas didn't flinch. You could try, but my son is outside with the rifle pointed at this window. Former Rangers are positioned throughout these mountains. FBI has this compound surrounded at a 2-mile perimeter. You shoot me, you die. And even if you didn't, your crimes are already documented. Rachel Chen's expose is running on every news network. Martinez is testifying about the explosives you ordered planted. Iron Wolves operators are cooperating with investigators. Your Pentagon office has been searched. The evidence is overwhelming. Wade lowered his hand from the weapon, realization settling in. So what do you want? Revenge? To see me destroyed? I want justice for the 12 Marines you killed. I want the truth about Helmand in the official record. I want every family who lost someone because of your weapons trafficking to know what really happened. They'll never believe you. I have friends, political influence, lawyers who can tie this up for years. You had friends, past tense. Politicians distanced themselves from scandals. Your influence evaporated the moment the story broke, and lawyers can't defend against evidence this solid. Thomas pulled out his phone, showed Wade the photographs Rachel had compiled. 14 years of investigation, financial records, communications intercepts, testimony from operators who'd worked for Wade, the entire conspiracy documented in excruciating detail. Wade stared at the phone and Thomas watched the exact moment the general understood he'd lost. The arrogance drained away, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. What happens now? Wade asked quietly. You surrender. Come with me peacefully. Face trial for your crimes. At least give the families of the men you killed the closure of seeing justice done. And if I refuse, then the FBI will extract you by force. You'll resist, things will get ugly, and you'll still end up in custody but with additional charges. Either way, this ends tonight. The only choice you have is how much dignity you maintain in the process. Wade looked around the compound, at the evidence of his failed operation, at the wreckage of a career that had promised so much and delivered only corruption. You know the funny thing? I actually believed I was doing the right thing. Believed that American power needed to be maintained at any cost. Believed that sacrifice was noble when it served strategic objectives. The Marines at Helmand believed they were serving their country. They died believing in you. I know, and that's the part I can't escape. Not the legal consequences or the public disgrace. The fact that men who trusted me died because of my orders. Wade set down his drink with a hand that trembled slightly. All right, Ghost, you win. I'll surrender. I'll testify. I'll tell everything. But I want one thing in exchange. You're not in a position to negotiate. I want the families to know I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, doesn't bring their loved ones back. But I want them to know that what I did has haunted me every day since Helmand, that I'm a traitor and a murderer, and I deserve whatever punishment comes. But I'm also a man who made terrible choices and has to live with that knowledge. Thomas studied Wade, looking for deception and finding only exhaustion. Write it down, a full confession, names, dates, everything. And include the apology. Then we'll talk about what I tell the families. Wade moved to his laptop, began typing. For the next 30 minutes, Thomas watched as a decorated general documented his own crimes in detail that would make prosecution inevitable. Every weapons sale, every payment, every order that had led to deaths, the Helmand massacre, the refugee center attack, all of it spelled out with the precision of a man who'd spent his career writing operational reports. When Wade finished, he saved the document to a flash drive and handed it to Thomas. It's all there, everything I've done, everyone who helped me. This will bring down half a dozen defense contractors and probably end the careers of 3 senators who took my money. Thomas pocketed the flash drive, knowing he was holding evidence that would reshape military and political landscapes. Let's go, the FBI is waiting. They walked out of the compound together, the general and the ghost, and found Marcus standing in the clearing with his rifle lowered. Father and son made eye contact, and Thomas saw the question there. It's over, Thomas said, Wade surrendering. Marcus studied the general with an expression Thomas couldn't quite read. Then he said to Wade, my father spent 14 years hiding because of you. My mother died thinking she'd been abandoned. You destroyed my family for profit. I want you to know that before they lock you up. Wade met Marcus's eyes. I know, and I'm sorry. It means nothing. I know that. But I am sorry. Sorry doesn't bring back the dead, but facing justice is a start. FBI vehicles were approaching through the trees, alerted by Sullivan that the situation was resolved. Agents emerged with weapons drawn, moving with professional caution even though Wade was clearly surrendering. They took him into custody, read his rights, secured him in an armored vehicle that would transport him to Seattle for processing. Before the vehicle drove away, Wade looked at Thomas through the window. You were always the best, Ghost. I should have realized you'd be the one to bring me down. Thomas didn't respond. There was nothing left to say to the man who'd destroyed so many lives. He just watched the vehicle disappear down the mountain road, taking Wade toward the justice he'd avoided for 14 years. Marcus stood beside him, and after the vehicles were gone, he said, is it really over? The manhunt is over. The prosecution is just beginning. But Wade's in custody. He can't hurt anyone else. And the Marines who died at Helmand? What about them? Tomorrow I testify before military investigators. Wade's confession and Rachel's evidence will ensure they're vindicated. Their families will know they died serving their country, not because of failed intelligence or bad luck. They'll know the truth. That's all we can give them now. Sometimes truth is enough. They drove back to Seattle as dawn broke over the Cascades, painting the mountains in shades of gold. Thomas felt exhaustion settling into bones that already ached from a lifetime of hard service. His hands hurt. His knees hurt. His back was a constant source of pain that even adrenaline couldn't mask anymore. But sitting beside his son, driving toward a future that for the first time in 14 years held something besides isolation and guilt, Thomas felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. The weeks that followed were a blur of testimony and investigation. Thomas spent hours with military prosecutors, walking them through every detail of Helmand. Martinez corroborated his account. Rachel provided documentary evidence. The case against Wade became airtight, and the general's confession eliminated any possibility of acquittal. 3 defense contractors were indicted. 2 senators resigned rather than face prosecution. The weapons trafficking network was dismantled. And 12 Marines who died at Helmand were posthumously decorated for their service and sacrifice, their families finally receiving the truth they deserved. The refugee center received federal protection and funding. Iron Wolves Corporation was dissolved, its operators facing various charges based on their level of involvement. The ones who'd surrendered peacefully received plea deals. The ones who'd fought received harsher sentences. Martinez was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, and the VA expedited his disability benefits that had been delayed for years. Doc helped him get into a PTSD treatment program specifically for contractors trying to reintegrate into civilian life. Rachel's expose won a Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism. She turned it into a book that became a bestseller, donating the proceeds to veteran support organizations. And Thomas faced the question he'd been avoiding since the moment he decided to come out of hiding. What came next? Sullivan provided the answer. Ghost Protocol worked. What you and the old guard did at the refugee center, that's the future of veteran engagement, using experience and tactical knowledge to protect communities, training younger generations, providing security consulting that actually keeps people safe instead of just checking boxes. They were sitting in the Veteran Center Sullivan ran, drinking coffee that was only marginally better than military issue. It had been 3 months since Wade's arrest, and Thomas was still adjusting to being alive in official records. You want me to train people? Thomas asked. I want you to lead the old guard as an organization, consulting for law enforcement, providing tactical education, supporting veteran mental health through purposeful engagement. Hawk, Doc, Rico, Bull, Martinez, they're all on board. We've got funding from a coalition of foundations impressed by what happened in Seattle. We've got credibility because we actually stopped a massacre when the official response would have arrived too late. I'm 62 years old. I can barely walk upstairs without my knees screaming, which makes you exactly the right person to teach people that experience beats youth. That tactical thinking matters more than physical capability. That warriors don't stop being warriors just because they get old. Thomas thought about it, thought about the alternative, which was returning to isolation in Montana, living out his remaining years with only guilt and memories for company. Then he thought about Marcus, about their slowly rebuilding relationship, about the possibility of being present for the life his son was building. All right, I'm in, but I have one condition. Name it. Marcus gets first choice on any training positions. If he wants to transition out of active duty and work with the old guard, I want that door open. Sullivan smiled. Already offered. He's thinking about it. That evening, Thomas had dinner with Marcus at a restaurant overlooking Puget Sound. It had become their weekly ritual, these quiet dinners where they talked about everything except the 14 years of separation, building a relationship in the present instead of dwelling on the pain of the past. Sullivan told me about the old guard organization, Marcus said over coffee. Sounds ambitious. Sounds impossible, which is why it might actually work. You really think you can make it sustainable? Training programs and consulting work for a bunch of aging veterans? I think we proved in Seattle that aging doesn't mean ineffective. We just need different tactics, different applications of skill. There's a market for what we can teach. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I've been offered a promotion, Lieutenant Colonel, command of a Ranger battalion at Fort Benning. Thomas felt pride and disappointment warring in his chest. Pride that his son was succeeding. Disappointment that success meant more distance between them. That's a hell of an opportunity. You'd be great at it. I turned it down. What? Why? Because I spent my whole career trying to be good enough to make my dead father proud. Trying to honor a legacy I thought was cut short by heroic sacrifice. Now I know the truth. My father's not dead. He's here building something that actually matters. And I'd rather be part of that than chase rank I don't need. Thomas felt his throat tighten. Marcus, you don't have to give up your career for me. I'll still be here whether you're at Benning or Seattle. This isn't about you. It's about me finally figuring out what I want instead of what I think I should want. I want to work with the old guard. I want to teach tactics to law enforcement. I want to help veterans find purpose after service. And yeah, I want to work alongside my father and maybe make up for some of the time we lost. You don't owe me that. I know, but I wanted it anyway. So if the offer's still open, I'd like to join the team. Thomas reached across the table, gripped his son's hand with fingers that shook from arthritis, but held firm with emotion. The offer's open. Welcome to the old guard, Captain Brennan. Lieutenant Colonel Brennan, actually. I took the promotion. Then I retired. Figure if I'm going to do this civilian thing, might as well do it with the best rank I could get. They both laughed, and it felt good, natural. Like a father and son who'd figured out how to be family again, despite everything that had tried to break them. 6 months after Wade's arrest, the old guard held its first official training session. 20 law enforcement officers from Seattle PD, learning tactical approaches from men who had spent decades perfecting them. Thomas taught the opening session, explaining how to think like a defender instead of an attacker, how to protect civilians instead of just eliminating threats. He watched Marcus work with the students, saw his son's natural teaching ability, saw the respect the young officers gave to the veteran who defended the refugee center, saw the pride in Marcus's eyes when he referenced his father's tactics during the explanation. The training was exhausting. Thomas's body protested every demonstration, every explanation that required standing for long periods. But his mind was sharp, and his experience was valuable, and he felt useful in a way he hadn't since Helmand. That night, the old guard gathered at Sullivan's Veterans Center for their weekly meeting. Thomas, Marcus, Sullivan, Hawk, Doc, Rico, Bull, and Martinez. 8 warriors who'd survived wars and betrayals and the simple passage of time. 8 men who'd proven that age didn't mean obsolete. We've got requests for training from 6 more agencies, Sullivan reported. SWAT teams, hostage rescue units, even some federal agencies who heard about Seattle. We're going to have to expand if we want to meet demand. Expansion means hiring younger instructors, Hawk pointed out. Former special operations guys who are still physically capable of demonstrations we can't do anymore. That's not a bad thing, Thomas said. We provide the tactical wisdom. They provide the physical demonstrations. It's mentorship, not replacement. Speaking of mentorship, Doc added, I've been talking with the VA about a program for combat medics transitioning to civilian medicine, using our experience to help them adapt their skills. Interested in being part of that? Always. What do you need? Your credibility, your story, showing that military skills translate to civilian applications. That veterans aren't broken, just differently capable. I can do that. Bull raised his coffee cup. To the old guard, may we keep proving that old dogs can teach new tricks. They all raised their cups, and Thomas felt something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Brotherhood. Purpose. A reason to wake up tomorrow that extended beyond just surviving another day. Rachel joined them an hour later, fresh from a book signing event. Her exposé had made her a national figure, but she still made time for the men who'd fought beside her in Seattle. I've got news, she said, settling into the group. PBS wants to do a documentary. The truth about Helmand, the refugee center defense, the old guard's formation. Full access, complete editorial control on our end, national broadcast. We're not looking for publicity, Thomas said cautiously. It's not publicity, it's education. Showing the country that veterans are assets, not liabilities. That the skills learned in war can be applied to peace. That men like you don't stop serving just because you stop wearing the uniform. What do you think? Thomas looked around at his team. I think we've been hiding long enough, Martinez said. Time to show people what we can do. The others nodded agreement, and Thomas realized they were right. Ghost had spent 14 years hiding. Thomas Brennan had spent 6 months rebuilding. Maybe it was time to step fully into the light. All right, we do the documentary, but we control the narrative. This is our story to tell. Agreed, sir, Rachel said. I'll set up the production meetings. As the evening wound down and people began leaving, Marcus pulled Thomas aside. I've got something for you. Been waiting for the right time. He handed Thomas a box. Inside were letters, hundreds of them. Letters in Mary's handwriting, addressed to a husband who she'd thought was dead. I thought you might want to read them now, might help you understand what she was thinking, what she hoped for. Thomas held the box with trembling hands, feeling the weight of 14 years of one-sided conversations. Thank you. Take your time with them. There's no rush. That night, alone in the small apartment he'd rented in Seattle, Thomas read his wife's letters. Each one was dated, written on anniversaries and birthdays, and ordinary days when Mary had needed to talk to the husband she'd lost. She wrote about Marcus's achievements, his graduation from West Point, his Ranger qualification, his wedding to a woman Mary loved like a daughter. She wrote about her cancer diagnosis, about the fear and pain, about wishing Thomas could be there to hold her hand through treatment. She wrote about forgiving him, even though she didn't understand why he'd left, about choosing to believe he'd died serving his country rather than believing he'd abandoned them, about the love that survived even death and distance. Thomas cried reading them, great racking sobs that came from 14 years of suppressed grief. Cried for the woman he'd loved and lost. Cried for the time they'd never have. Cried for the choices that had seemed so necessary and had cost so much. But he also found peace in those letters. Mary had shown at peace, believing in a husband who'd never stopped loving her even when he couldn't tell her. That wasn't nothing. That was grace neither of them had earned, but both had received. The next morning, Thomas called Marcus. I read the letters. And I understand. She forgave me even when she had no reason to. The least I can do is forgive myself and move forward. That's all she would have wanted. There's one more thing I need to do for closure. Will you help me? Whatever you need. 3 days later, Thomas stood at Arlington National Cemetery in front of a memorial stone that bore his own name. Staff Sergeant Thomas J. Brennan, United States Marine Corps. Died in service to his country, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Marcus stood beside him. So did the old guard. Rachel was there with her camera, documenting this moment for the documentary. Federal prosecutors had arranged special permission for this visit, understanding that some ceremonies were more important than bureaucratic regulations. Thomas placed flowers at the base of the memorial, then spoke to the ghost he'd been for 14 years. I'm here to tell you goodbye. You served well. You protected people who needed protecting. You made hard choices that cost everything. But it's time to rest now. Time to let Thomas Brennan live again, openly and honestly. Time to stop being a ghost and start being a father, a friend, a teacher. You'll always be part of me, but you don't have to be all of me anymore. He stepped back, and Marcus stepped forward, placing his own flowers. I'm here to tell you I understand now. I understand why you did what you did. I understand the sacrifice you made, and I forgive you for the years we lost. You're my father, and I'm proud of that. Not because of what you did in war, but because of who you are now. Welcome home, Dad. The word Dad hung in the air, spoken for the first time in 14 years, and Thomas felt something break and heal simultaneously in his chest. They left Arlington together, the old guard and the family they'd built from brotherhood and shared purpose. Behind them, the memorial stone remained, a marker for a ghost who no longer needed to haunt the living. 1 year after Wade's arrest, Thomas stood in a federal courtroom and watched as the general was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The families of the Helmand 12 were present, and Thomas spoke to each of them, sharing memories of their loved ones, ensuring they knew their Marines had died as heroes, not as casualties of intelligence failure. The Old Guard organization had expanded to 15 full-time instructors and had trained over 500 law enforcement officers in advanced tactical procedures. Marcus was leading the program, proving to be a gifted teacher and administrator. Martinez had become the organization's demolitions and engineering instructor, teaching bomb disposal techniques to EOD teams. His prosthetic leg didn't slow him down, and his story of redemption inspired young veterans struggling with transition. Sullivan had expanded the Veteran Center into a national network, using Old Guard success as a model for purposeful engagement that kept warriors connected to service. Hawk, Doc, Rico, and Bull had each found their niches, teaching the specialized skills they'd honed over decades. They moved slower than they used to, complained more about aches and pains, but their minds were sharp and their dedication was absolute. And Thomas, 63 years old and feeling every year of it, stood before each new training class and told them the same thing. You're looking at a man who should be dead, who spent 14 years pretending to be dead, who came back from the grave because his son needed him and innocent people needed protecting. Age and injury haven't made me less capable. They've made me differently capable. Smarter, more patient, more willing to find solutions that don't require physical dominance. That's what I'm here to teach you. How to be effective warriors regardless of your physical limitations. How to use experience as your greatest weapon. How to prove that ghosts aren't things to be feared. They're forces to be reckoned with. On a clear autumn evening, Thomas sat on his apartment balcony watching Seattle's lights come alive. His phone buzzed. Text message from Sullivan. New situation. Domestic terrorism threat in Portland. Local PD requesting Old Guard assessment and tactical consultation. Interested? Thomas looked at the message, felt the familiar surge of purpose that came with being needed. He was 63. His hands shook. His body was breaking down. But his mind was sharp and his team was ready. He texted back, always ready, Old Guard deploys tomorrow. Because that was the truth he'd learned through everything. Warriors don't stop being warriors when they age. They just become different kinds of warriors. Wiser, more experienced, more dangerous to anyone who underestimated them. Ghosts never truly died. They just found new battles worth fighting. And the Old Guard was ready for whatever came next. Together. Thank you for watching Ghost Story. As a storyteller, I'm honored to share tales that reflect the values many of you live by: duty, sacrifice, brotherhood. Thomas Brennan reminds me why experience matters more than youth. At 62, with arthritic hands, he proved tactical wisdom beats raw strength every time. Question for you, veterans in military families. Have you ever known someone who came back from war a different person? How did they find purpose again after service? Your stories in the comments inspire the next episode. And if Ghost Journey resonated with you, we've got more warriors whose stories deserve to be told. Check out the suggested videos or subscribe so you never miss when these heroes answer the call. What did you think of the old guard's non-lethal tactics? Smart or too risky? Let's discuss below.